Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Casual Criminal. Settle in for a long one because David's written a script. They always get long. This one this one's not too bad. It's like 40 pages, David, so it's kind of light for you, my dude. Anyway, the format of the show, if you're new here, first of all, very warm welcome, and welcome back everyone who's a fan. Yes, please, the Atlanta Child Murders. I've never read it before. We're going to explore it together, dear audience. Let's jump in, shall we? And like I say, settle in, get comfortable. Pour yourself a glass of wine. Or maybe a glass of Gamer Subs, who is the sponsor of today's episode, by the way. And if you want to get some Gamer Subs, you can go to, looking at the link, gamersubs.gg/TCC. It's fantastic stuff. It keeps me juiced up. It's caffeinated. It's cheap. It's great. Cheap like in a good way. It's like, I always compare it to like energy drinks, like expensive energy drinks, you know, that give you wings. Too close? Can't mention competitors. But so expensive. This, not. Let's get into it. It was May the 22nd, 1981, at approximately 2:50 a.m. in Atlanta, Georgia. Officer Bob Campbell, a newly recruited beat cop in his early 20s, sat in his patrol car watching for any sign of movement on the James Jackson Parkway Bridge over the Chattahoochee River, maybe? Chattahoochee? The bridge was small and poorly lit, and normally Campbell wouldn't be alone on a stakeout, but the Atlanta cops were spread thin. Over 100 officers have been assigned to a task force desperately keeping eyes on every bridge crossing, wooded area, and vacant lot in the city. Oh, I don't want to give away too much about exactly where I live, but I live in Prague, right? And I live in an area of town where there's a lot of like, not important people living, but there's some like embassies and houses that house like diplomats and stuff. And there is one on my close to where I live, not on my street, definitely not on my street, where there is constantly a policeman parked outside 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And that dude is just sitting in his cop car, just sat there the whole day. I go to work and there's a dude there, and I drive home from work and there is a dude there. I'll get back from the pub late at night, there is a dude there. All the time. And I cannot think of anything more boring. Good Lord. They took up their posts night after night, week after week. They'd spotted no one suspicious and made no arrests, yet someone kept dumping bodies. Yeah, the dude near my house, he's not looking out for anything interesting. He's just there to stop like crimes against people. Someone kept killing people. Some of the victims were young men the same age as Officer Campbell, but most of the victims had been children. Oh God, this is called the Atlanta Child Murders. David! I don't like them about the murdering of the children, and that's what caused the public outcry and gave the series of killings their name, the Atlanta Child Murders. I've been to Atlanta several times. My aunt lives in Atlanta. Back on March the 16th, the body of a 15-year-old boy had been discovered in the Chattahoochee River. 2 weeks later, on March the 30th, they found the remains of a 13-year-old boy dumped in the woods. Then, 3 more victims, all in their early 20s, were discovered at the beginning of April. They had all been murdered in just the space of a week. 2 more victims followed before the month was out, and this madness had carried on for nearly 2 years. The youngest victim had been 7. Then, on May the 12th, a 17-year-old boy was found strangled to death in a vacant lot not far from his home. Jesus Christ, this is like the victims are all over the place. 7? What the f***? And now, there's nothing like a 7-year-old. My daughter's 5, and it's just like, they're just so pure. There's nothing they don't, I swear to God, they don't think anything bad. They're just like nice and sullied by the world. I just don't understand. 7. And now 10 days later, as Officer Bob Campbell watched the bridge and struggled to stay awake, police still had no suspects. Nothing substantial. Yet keeping over 100 officers on high alert required extra manpower to be shipped in from other counties to maintain the regular administration of law and order in a city of 430,000 people that already had a high rate of crime. So Atlanta I guess that's back in the 80s. I feel like Atlanta's a bigger city than 430,000 people. Doesn't it have like the biggest airport in the world? The extra burden was starting to drain the city's coffers. Given the stakeouts had so far proven fruitless, the mayor's office quietly gave the order to scale down operations, starting in just 3 days' time. Officer Campbell was eagerly waiting for his radio to roar back to life and trumpet the news that his replacement for the rest of the night was on the way. Campbell was exhausted. He just wanted to get home and get some sleep. Yeah, dude, I know that feeling. Like when you're working a job and like you're working like a late shift or whatever, and it's like you're just watching that clock and that seconds hand like tick, tick, ticking like, come on, I want to go home and go to sleep. He just wanted to get home and get some sleep. Then he heard a noise that made him sit bolt upright. He heard a splash. Soon afterward, Campbell saw a pair of brake lights glowing in the distance. A car was on the bridge. The driver must have killed his headlights so that Campbell didn't see him there in the first place. But the brake lights could not be extinguished, and when the vehicle turned around to avoid Campbell's patrol car, the young officer saw the brake lights flicker on and off for a moment. The young beat cop leaned forward and squinted his eyes. He couldn't determine the make of the car, and the vehicle had now begun to drive away from him in the opposite direction. Campbell grabbed his radio and informed the other patrol cars in the area what he'd seen and what he'd heard. Move in, guys. Move in. This is exactly why you're stationed there, Campbell. Good call on calling your mates, and now let's get him captured. Half a mile from the James Jackson Bridge, the cops pulled over a white station wagon. At 3 a.m., it was the only civilian car on the road. In the vehicle was a lone male, mid-20s, large, thick glasses, chubby, looking nervous. The cops asked him to turn off the engine and step out of the vehicle. The man complied. He was only 5'6", and unprompted, the man said, "I know this is about those boys." Hardly surprising, the so-called Atlanta child murders have been front-page news for months. Yeah, I suppose he could say that even if he's not the murderer. He could be like, yeah, no, I was just out doing getting some beers. I don't know what the he was doing. And you get pulled over by the cops and you're like, oh, this is about that, isn't it? No, it's not me, dude. It's really not me. I was just getting beers. The beers are in the back. There's no bodies. Like, don't arrest me. Just please, take my ID. The man presented his driver's license and the cop took down his details. One of the officers asked the man why he was on the bridge at 3 a.m. The man seemed annoyed by the question and sarcastically replied, "To get to the other side." Bro, you're not talking to your mates, you're talking to a police officer. Either don't answer the question, you don't have to, or answer the question seriously. Don't joke. The officer sternly repeated his question, no shit. Why were you on the bridge? The man told the officer he was a talent agent in the music business and regularly took on new clients. Okay, seeing where this goes. That night he was driving out of the suburb of Smyrna, 8 miles to the northwest, to interview a potential new singer, a young lady called Cheryl Johnson. Along the way, he had driven to a payphone, this was the 80s, right, to confirm the singer's address. She hadn't answered, so the man had decided to drive home. The officer asked for Cheryl Johnson's contact information, and the man provided a phone number and an address. The cop jotted down the information in his notebook. This is very good policing so far. Take his information, you don't have enough on him to arrest him, so take his information and get his ID, get his address, all of that stuff. Probably going to let him go or trail him or whatever, or have him watched, and then follow up on this, phone the woman in the morning and see if this is a real story. Then the officer asked, "Why did you turn around on the bridge?" "I didn't," the man replied. "I was on my way back from the payphone, headed home." The cop asked, "Did you stop on the bridge?" "No," the man answered. "I drove straight across." Meanwhile, another police officer conducted a search of the man's white station wagon. In the back of the vehicle, the officer found a pair of leather gloves and a 24-inch nylon cord. The officer put the items back where he had found them, despite having probable cause to confiscate them as potential evidence. Here was a vehicle that may have been involved in a body dump, and the killer they were looking for was known for using strangulation. Yeah, take that stuff. No, you've definitely got a reason to have a look at that.
Dude, what's all that stuff you're grabbing?
Tools! Tools! Duct tape, zip ties, and gloves! I have to have my tools!
Although the man's story was suspicious, he was not detained and was allowed to drive home. By his own admission, the man cleaned the interior of the white station wagon the following morning. The nylon cord and the leather gloves, on the other hand, simply went missing. Alright, that's mad suspicious, but also, if you're actually guilty of something, this is exactly what you have to do, no matter how suspicious it looks. Because as we always say, tampering with evidence or disposing of evidence is a good idea, even if it's illegal, if the consequences of the crime are bigger than the consequences of disposing of evidence. Allegedly. Don't take out. It's not legal advice, obviously. 3 days later, the body of a 27-year-old man was found in the Chattahoochee River. The victim had been strangled to death with a ligature of some kind. The body had been stripped naked, and the police suspected that the attack had been sexual in nature. There were no signs of penetration, but FBI profilers were operating under the assumption that the killer's MO was to fondle the corpses and then masturbate next to them while taking care to leave no trace of bodily fluids. Which is smart. You're doing this in the 80s. Today, it's common knowledge, DNA will get you, but this was the 80s, though. DNA was barely a thing, if it was a thing at all. When police ran the name, phone number, and address of the singer, Cheryl Johnson, they discovered that the phone number did not belong to her, that the address did not exist, and indeed, there was no such person as Cheryl Johnson at all. Alright, that's arresting time. You can arrest him now. I forget there's the police. You don't need to call them in the morning. You just need to use that magical police database to find out, because you can enter a phone number and it'll tell you a name, because the police have lots of information about you that regular people don't have access to. Neighborhood ghoul. On July the 21st, 1979, 14-year-old Teddy Smith took his girlfriend on a date to the local skating rink. Smith had some pocket money from doing odd jobs for people in the neighborhood. Sometimes this involved getting in their cars and being taken to a second location, but Smith's mother said that he never got into cars with people that he didn't trust. Very good advice, very smart, even though it's the 80s. This is, nowadays I feel like, yeah, obviously, but this was the past, this is still good. Smith and his girlfriend left the skating rink and parted ways at 10 p.m. Then Teddy Smith disappeared without a trace. 4 days later, on the night of July 25th, 13-year-old Alfred Q. Evans left his mother's home to hang out with friends on the streets. I wish I had a cool nickname. This dude's nickname is just Q. His name is Alfred Evans, and he's just called Q. I'm like, that's cool. I was watching the train in the snow, Snowpiercer, and the guy in there, the main bad guy is called Mr. Wilford, but they call him Dubs, because his surname is W, and I'm like, I wish people called me Dubs. It's like a cool nickname. Instead, I'm just called Simon. Everyone just calls me Simon, which is my name. He was in the habit of staying out all night and was known to run with a group of friends involved in drug use and petty crimes. That's because he's cool. He's got a name called Q. Evans grew up not far away from Teddy and also did odd jobs in the neighborhood for pocket money. When Evans did not return home that night, his mother was not immediately alarmed. He's 13! I know it was the past, but he's 13. But when Alfred Evans did not return by the following evening, his mother became anxious. I'm just looking back, this kid is 13. She phoned her son's friends and found out that they'd last seen him waiting for a bus in order to come home. Alfred's mother called the police. The cops took the boy's name and description, but assigned the case a low priority because Evans had been a runaway in the past. They reassured Alfred's mother that he'd probably show up in a day or two, and they told her not to worry. I feel like I must have missed something. That maybe that's a typo and it should say he was 23 rather than 13, because this just seems crazy. 13, you're barely a teenager. On July the 28th, 1979, the bodies of two teenage boys were found in the woods in southwest Atlanta. They were later identified as Teddy Smith and Alfred Evans. Teddy had been shot multiple times in the upper back with a .22 caliber weapon. Alfred had been strangled to death. Homicide detectives soon received a tip that the deaths were drug-related. The boys had allegedly been seen together at a local flophouse, smoking pot a few days before they both went missing. Both Teddy and Alfred's mothers denied that their sons did drugs, but the mere allegation was enough. Yeah, it was the 80s. It's like, of course he got shot in the back multiple times. He was smoking weed. What do you expect?
What are you doing? I'm so high. Nothing can hurt me. No!
Marijuana kills.
Atlanta PD neglected to follow up on either cases, and they soon went cold. Jesus, that is some lazy-ass police work. What the f***? Both of the boys were black. Oh. That, as sad as it is, does help explain that police laziness, doesn't it? Because nothing like a little bit of racism. Accusations of police racism soon began to circulate. Can't imagine why. This was Atlanta. The legacy of slavery, public lynchings, and Jim Crow still burned red hot in the public memory, despite the city now having a black mayor, a majority black city council, and a majority black police force, approximately 58%. Okay then. Outright segregation had only ended 15 years ago. Oh, it's the 1980s. That's so nuts. And so 2 black kids being murdered, and the police not seeming to care, ruffled a lot of feathers in the inner city. On the afternoon of September 4th, 1979, 14-year-old Milton Harvey got on his bike to ride to the bank and deposit a check for his mother. Then he disappeared. His bike was found in a vacant lot a week later. Harvey's mother reported him missing, but the police did not follow up on his case file. They thought that Milton Harvey was yet another runaway. The usual reasoning was applied. Black kid, rough neighborhood, broken home, no dad in the picture. He'd soon turn up. Doing this whole he'd soon turn up thing for kids who are 13 and 14 police is wild. Milton Harvey's remains were discovered in the woods 2 months later in early November. His body was so badly decomposed that the coroner could not determine the cause of death. We now know that it was likely strangulation, but the extent of decomposition prevented neck bruises or ligature marks from being detected on the skin. On the evening of October 21st, 1979, A 9-year-old boy named Yusuf Bell was playing in the street with some friends. An elderly neighbor, Eula Birdsong, asked Yusuf to run down to the shop and buy her some snuff, finely ground tobacco that you snort up your nose. I've tried that, it's really unpleasant. Birdsong told Yusuf that he could keep whatever change was left. Witnesses placed Yusuf Bell at the local convenience store buying snuff and some candy. A separate witness reported seeing Yusuf getting into a blue car after exiting the store. Then the 9-year-old boy disappeared. Yusuf, if they're going to be like, oh, show up, he's 9! For fuck's sake, police. This seems to be very much a the police episode. Yusuf's mother, Camille Bell, reported him missing later that night. The police took his description, but did not follow up. Camille Bell insisted that her son was not a runaway and not a problem child. Camille kept phoning the police multiple times a day for the next 2 weeks. She canvassed the neighborhood for witnesses herself. Can you imagine feeling so fucking betrayed? Can you imagine that the police are just doing nothing? Jesus Christ, can you imagine then it's like it comes around to that time of year and it's like, all right, time to pay my taxes? I'd be like, fuck you. How about you do something? Then on November the 8th, the remains of Yusuf Bell were found behind an abandoned elementary school by a caretaker who was looking for a place to urinate. The 9-year-old boy had been bludgeoned twice in the back of the head before being strangled to death. The discovery of Yusuf Bell happened only a few days after the police found the decomposed remains of Milton Harvey, but the police did not link Bell and Harvey's deaths together, nor link them to the body dumps of Smith and Evans in July. However, before 1979 ended, Yusuf Bell's mother, Camille, began to suspect that all 4 homicides were related. She thought a killer was in the neighborhood targeting black children. You're doing the work, you're doing a better job than the police. In early 1980, she established the Stop the Murders Mothers Committee and recruited other families affected, but the Atlanta PD took little notice. I mean, fuck you, Atlanta PD. Fuck you. On March the 4th, 1980, a 12-year-old girl named Angel Lanier was at a friend's house watching Sanford & Son. She left at 5 p.m., intending to swing by the convenience store for her mother before heading home for dinner. She did not make it home. 6 days later, on March the 10th, Angel's body was discovered in a forested vacant lot in southwest Atlanta. Her arms had been bound with electrical cord, and she had underwear that was not her own, stuffed in her mouth. She had been strangled with some kind of ligature. The very next day, 11-year-old Jeffrey Mathis left his house and headed to a convenience store to buy cigarettes for his mother. A witness saw Mathis get into a blue car with a light-skinned man and a dark-skinned man. Jeffrey's body was not found until 11 months later in February 1981. He had been dumped in a thick patch of woods in southwest Atlanta, and after such a long time, decomposition prevented the coroner from establishing a cause of death. Strangulation was again suspected. Meanwhile, back on May 18th, 1980, 14-year-old Eric Middlebrooks was watching TV at his mother's home when the phone rang. The teenager answered, and after having a conversation that lasted several minutes, which his mother was not able to overhear, Eric Middlebrooks rushed out of the house and rode away on his bike. The following day, May 19th, his body was found in an alleyway behind a local bar and a parole office. Middlebrooks had been slashed across the arms, had a few light gouges in his chest, but the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. His pockets were turned inside out and the contents were gone, but there's no way of knowing whether the killer robbed him or if it was done subsequently by a passerby. Dude, fucking piece of shit. I mean, obviously the person who killed him's the worst piece of shit, but what a piece of shit to see a dead kid and think, I'm going to empty their pockets and not do anything. Fuck you. This episode, fuck humanity, man. Fuck us all. A red carpet fiber was found on the sole of his shoe, and despite fiber analysis being a fairly new science, it was bagged as evidence. Like many of the other victims, Eric Middlebrooks did his odd jobs around the neighborhood for a little money. He was particularly good at repairing bikes and had left home with a hammer that he used for that purpose. The hammer was never found. Middlebrooks was known to perform odd jobs for men with criminal records, and the teenager had recently testified against 3 other juveniles in a robbery case. There was thus some ambiguity over whether Middlebrooks had been killed out of revenge or if he had simply been jumped by a shady person. And if the latter, was it a recently released criminal who had just come out of the parole office, a drunken stranger had just staggered out of the bar, or was it someone Middlebrooks knew and did errands for? I mean, we don't know, but I'd say that's a good place to start with the parole office. Looking for people with criminal records, criminals more likely to commit crimes. On June the 9th, 1980, 12-year-old Christopher Richardson departed his house to go swimming at the local pool. He was last spotted walking by the side of the road in the direction of the rec center. Then he disappeared. His remains were not discovered until January 1981. He was found in the woods. Like several other victims, Christopher's body was so badly decayed that the coroner could not determine cause of death. Strangulation was again suspected. Back on June 22nd, 1980, a 7-year-old girl, LaTonya Wilson, was abducted from her parents' apartment while she was home alone. What are you doing leaving a 7-year-old at home by themselves? A witness saw a man climbing into the apartment window and later saw him talking to another man in the parking lot while he held LaTonya in his arms. Her body was found in a vacant lot 4 months. Why the fuck is this witness caught not calling the police? Humanity, what's going on? Why is everyone failing everybody? You see something, say something. This time, local wildlife had reduced her remains to a skeleton, and a definitive cause of death couldn't be determined. Meanwhile, on June the 23rd, 1980, nearly a day after LaTonya Wilson was abducted, 10-year-old Anthony Weich disappeared after exiting a corner grocery store in South Atlanta at 5 p.m. A witness said the boy was being led away by a 6-foot-tall black man, approximately 180 pounds, with a moustache and a goatee. They got into a blue car. The witness was unsure whether there was a second man with them. A separate witness claimed he spotted Anthony Weich at 6 p.m. unaccompanied at the local shopping mall. The following day, June 24th, Anthony's body was found under a railway bridge. Initially, police thought that the boy had been playing on the bridge and had fallen off, breaking his neck, but the coroner soon determined that someone had throttled Anthony Weich with such ferocity that his neck had snapped. By the start of July, almost a year since the killings began, a total of 10 children had been murdered. That they know about, right? Fear and Loathing in South Atlanta. By mid-1980, the newspapers began to pick up the story that black children were being targeted in southern Atlanta. The police began to entertain the possibility that a serial killer was on the loose. However, they deemed it more likely that multiple murderers were operating in Atlanta at that time. Some of the cases might be connected to a child predator or a pair of child predators. Other cases might be the result of one-off violent deaths. Atlanta was, after all, a pretty rough town, and if it was a serial killer, police were concerned that many of the victims had been abducted in broad daylight without witnesses noticing any signs of struggle. This implied that the killer was known to the victims. Perhaps he had even paid some of the children to run errands for him. Meanwhile, rumors circulated that the KKK was abducting and murdering black children from the inner city and making it look like it was a lone wolf. Still, I mean, the KKK is like fucked up and all sorts of shit, but are they known for murdering children? And I'm not trying to defend the KKK. Obviously, crazy-ass racists. But, like, were they known for killing children? Still others in the public argued that there wasn't a serial. Like, you can be a fucking piece of shit, asshole racist. But to, like, graduate to the murder of children seems like that is a step up from just being a piece of shit racist. Maybe I just don't know enough about the KKK. People will be like, dude, the KKK was killing children left, right, and center. I'll be like, I was wrong. I don't know enough about it. Still others in the public argued that there wasn't a serial killer at all, and it was just the result of downtown Atlanta being crime-ridden and violent. Oh, well, that's okay then. Might as well just not even try. As for those who thought it was a serial killer, they mostly entertained the idea that the perpetrator was white. And internally, the police broadly agreed with this assessment. Statistically, white men were overwhelmingly more likely to be serial killers than black men. Yeah. We've got a whole lot more white people on this podcast than we have black dudes. White people become serial killers more often. Or so it was thought at the time. But a white guy in inner city Atlanta soliciting children would stick out like a sore thumb. So how could he have moved around black neighborhoods largely undetected? Yeah, I'd say that's a pretty strong indicator that it's not a white dude in this case, despite the statistics. And some witnesses had described seeing either a light-skinned or dark-skinned black man. Naturally, amid all of these questions about the killer's race and the slowly boiling tensions, the public began to accuse the police of knowing who the killer was and covering up for him. Oh, I don't think there's a conspiracy. I just think the police are Conspiracy theories abounded, accusations of racism mounted. Oh yeah, and racist. All the while, it seemed like the police were doing little or nothing. But the blunt truth was that the police had no suspects. They had very little in the way of forensic evidence. Witness testimony was patchy and rare. It was therefore a struggle for the police to find any solid leads, even if they wanted to. And at this point, they sorely wanted to. Gone were the days when they shrugged victims off as runaways who suffered delinquency-related deaths. The police now wanted these cases solved. Well, good. Took you long enough to get your finger out your bottom, didn't it? If the abduction and murder of black children continued, it would be a public relations nightmare. Oh, right, yeah, that's why we've got to make it stop, because of the PR problem. That's right. Not because it's the right thing to do. And there were fears that it would lead to full-scale riots. Meanwhile, the African-American inhabitants of inner-city Atlanta began to discuss setting up vigilante groups to track the killer. Parents began forbidding their children from leaving the house. The streets began to look more and more deserted. Even adults didn't want to leave home. Not for fear of being killed, but for fear of being falsely accused of being the killer. Such was the distrust of the police that many black Atlantans feared they'd try to pin the murders on the first half-decent suspects. Yep, not an unreasonable fear, to be honest. On the evening of July the 5th, 1980, the weather was so hot and stuffy that numerous children were finally permitted out into the fresh air to have water fights, play hide-and-seek, or enjoy a game of kickball. The decision to let the kids out to play was by no means universal, but more children were seen on the street that night than there had been in weeks. That evening, 9-year-old Anthony Carter's mother was reluctant to let him go out and join his friends, but she ultimately consented. Anthony and his friends played hide-and-seek for several hours. He ignored his mother's 10 p.m. curfew and stayed out long after midnight. And then sometime in the early hours of July 6th, 9-year-old Anthony Carter disappeared. He was found the next day, July 7th, lying in an abandoned warehouse. He had been stabbed to death. On July 17th, the mayor of Atlanta, Maynard Jackson, announced the creation of a police task force that would hunt the perpetrator or perpetrators of the child murders. It would be composed of over 100 police officers, and it would bring in the behavioral science experts from the FBI. Get the FBI in. Like local police, or city police, or whatever, generally not the strongest. FBI is going to get done. Mayor Jackson assured the public that everything was being done to stop the killings, and, quote, someone out there knows what we're looking for, knows who's doing this insane series of acts. Maybe not. Serial killers, lone wolves, you know. One of the FBI agents brought to Atlanta was the now legendary criminal profiler Ray Hazelwood. He insisted on seeing the neighborhoods where the kids were taken. He was driven around South Atlanta by 2 black policemen in a squad car. Hazelwood immediately concluded that the killer was unlikely to be white because, quote, as soon as we turned onto a street, everything stopped. People just stared. I asked what was going on. The officers just laughed and said it was because they had a honky in the car. I guess a honky's a white dude. I've not heard that before.
Honky is a racial epithet used for white people. It was made popular by a man named George Jefferson in the 1970s.
Ever since the quote-unquote white flight of Caucasians to the Atlanta suburbs in the 50s and 60s, white people had become a rare sight in the inner city. There was no way in hell a white killer could prowl those streets abducting children, much less a large crew of KKK members. Hazelwood felt adamant that the murderer was black. His superiors agreed with him, including John Glover, the African-American district chief of the Atlanta FBI. Some black Atlantans greeted the theory with suspicion, claiming it was an attempt to quell racial tensions by pinning it on one of their own. No, I mean, it's just logic. Like, the white dude in the inner city is obviously sticking out mega time. On July, but it's going to be you. It's hard to sell that, I guess. On July the 30th, 1980, not even 2 weeks after the establishment of the task force, a 10-year-old boy named Earl Terrell went out with a few friends to the local swimming pool. After about half an hour, Earl was kicked out of the pool for roughhousing and threatening a lifeguard. He's 10 years old. He told his friends that he was going to walk home, but he didn't make it. According to the boy's aunt, she received a phone call that night from a man saying that he had Earl locked in his basement. Police followed up on the tip, but nothing came of it. The source of the call could not be traced or confirmed to have happened at all. In January 1981, the remains of Earl Terrell were discovered in the woods. Once again, the body was too decomposed to establish a cause of death, but again, strangulation was suspected. On August 20th, 1980, 13-year-old Clifford Jones was abducted from St. James and Lookout Avenue while collecting cans to sell. Witnesses claimed that they saw the boy leaving with a white man. Jones was discovered the next day, August 21st, next to a dumpster behind a shopping mall, strangled. Witnesses later identified a white sex offender from a photo lineup, but the police task force then determined that the man had a solid alibi for the time of the abduction. Not everyone in the black community was convinced the man was innocent, however, and public anger reached new heights. Yeah, but you can't fold to public anger. It's like, he's... You can't get railroaded. You can't be too quick to just jump on it, because not only does then an innocent person get into trouble, but it also means you're not out there hunting for the person who's actually doing this stuff. Then 3 teenagers came forward, claiming that they had seen Jones being raped and murdered in a laundromat by a black man named Jamie Brooks and an unidentified accomplice. Somehow the teens had seen the whole thing through the window of the laundromat, including Brooks cleaning up the evidence. As word circulated, 2 more witnesses came forward, claiming that they'd seen Jamie Brooks carrying the body from his home, not the laundromat, to the shopping mall dumpster. Police did not deem any of these reports credible, and Jamie Brooks was not arrested. Well, they're very different stories. Definitely enough for questioning, though. The Atlanta child murders were now receiving national attention, and the U.S. Attorney General revealed to the media that the case was being followed by both President Jimmy Carter and the Republican presidential candidate Ronald Reagan. The police task force announced that it was offering a $100,000 reward, that's $382,700 today, for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the Atlanta child killer. The reward generated a flood of tips, but no results. Meanwhile, due to the perceived police inaction, Black Atlantans made good on their promises to form a vigilante group. The largest of these was the Bat Patrol, so named because squads of men would patrol the streets armed with baseball bats in an attempt to scare off child predators. But it didn't work. The human web. On September the 14th, 1980, at 4 p.m., 10-year-old Darren Glass returned home from a baseball game. Darren lived with his foster mother, Fannie Mae Smith, in southeast Atlanta. Both of Darren's parents had died, and Darren was in foster care for the past year and living with Fannie Mae for the past 3 weeks. After returning from the baseball game, Darren left the house again. Fannie Mae assumed that he'd gone out to play, but he never came back inside. An hour later, Fannie Mae received a phone call from Darren. He sounded anxious, but the call was quickly disconnected. Then Darren Glass disappeared forever. His body was never found. On October the 9th, 1980, 12-year-old Charles Stevens was drawing doodles and watching TV at his parents' house. Then Charles got up and said he was going to go and hang out with a friend. At 4:30 p.m., and it's like children in the past were just like 12-year-olds, just like roaming off doing their own thing. Then Charles got up and said he was going to go hang out with a friend. At 4:30 p.m., a neighbor saw Charles Stevens riding a skateboard not far from his home. The neighbor also spotted a light-skinned black man nearby, allegedly watching the boy. The man didn't respond to the neighbor's greeting. The body of Charles Stevens was discovered the next day, October 10th, in the bushes next to the entrance of a trailer park. Bruises on the nose and mouth indicated someone had smothered the boy. Dog hairs were found on the victim's body, as were 2 human head hairs. A pair of boxers were found lying several feet away from the body, containing 2 pubic hairs. The boxers belonged to Charles. The pubic hairs did not. Dude. In response, the city council announced a new initiative called Saturday Searchers. Every Saturday, volunteers would comb the woods, vacant lots, and abandoned buildings looking for bodies. This is how the skeletal remains of 7-year-old LaTonya Wilson were found. On October the 30th, the mayor imposed a citywide curfew on all unaccompanied minors. Good idea. On the morning of November the 1st, 1980, 9-year-old Aaron Jackson was abducted from the Moreland Avenue shopping center in southeast Atlanta. His body was found the next day, lying face up on a riverbank next to a bridge. God, this really is. It's just like, it feels so hopeless. Like, what are the police supposed to do? It's happening so quickly. It's just happening so quickly, and there's so many victims. How are the police supposed to stop this? He had been strangled. Aaron Jackson was schoolmates with the previous victim, Aaron Weich, who had been killed 4 months earlier in June. A few days later, on November the 10th, 16-year-old Patrick Patman Rogers caught a bus with his 7-year-old brother Isaac and brought the younger boy home to their mother. Then Patrick Rogers paid a visit to the apartment of his friend Joe Harper, with whom Patrick wrote music. But Joe's mother, Mary Harper, told him that her son wasn't home. Patrick left, and then he disappeared. This is just days later. This is stepping up to so many so quick. Have I never heard of this? Have I never heard of this insane amount of serial killing in Atlanta? This is already much worse than a lot more famous serial killers. Patrick Rogers worked as a bag boy at the Moreland Avenue shopping center, and he knew both Aaron Jackson and Aaron Weich. Patrick also knew Darren Glass and 3 other boys who would soon become victims. Patrick Rogers was an aspiring musician who had recently met a talent agent. The agent had been walking around Patrick's neighborhood the week before, distributing flyers, advertising free representation and sound recordings to anyone between the ages of 11 and 21. When Patrick visited the apartment of Joe Harper on November the 10th, he told Mary Harper that the agent was interested in recording their songs. After Patrick's disappearance, the police did not seek to locate the talent agent for an interview. Why not? You have basically nothing to go on. Follow up the shitty leads, even if they are shitty. Come on now. The body of Patrick Rogers was found on December the 7th on the shoreline of the Chattahoochee River near the Paces Ferry Road Bridge. The cause of death? Blunt force trauma to the head. Police concluded that the victim had been dropped directly off the bridge into the water. By the end of 1980, a total of 17 victims had been killed, all of them minors. It's a huge body count. So quickly. Do we catch this guy? The Atlanta child murders? I don't know. David's very good at not letting in on what's happening or whether they get caught. I fucking hope so. Let's get a needle in this guy's arm. It's Atlanta, right? They're going to have death penalty. If he doesn't get caught and lots more people die, I'm going to be very upset. And come on, police. And I know it's kind of a helpless situation, but god damn. On January the 3rd, 1981, 14-year-old Luby Getter was last seen talking to a light-skinned black man wearing a baseball cap outside of the Stewart Lakewood shopping center. I think at this point it's fairly It's a light-skinned black dude, right? Who is appearing a weird number of times. That seems like our guy. Getter liked to hang out there selling car deodorizers that he had stolen from a car wash where he had a part-time job. Hustler. According to the witness, after several minutes of conversation, Luby got into a car with a man in the baseball cap. The witness was able to provide enough of a description of the older man for police to produce a sketch. This was circulated in the media, but did not yield any reliable tips. Luby Geter's body was found in the woods a month later, on February 5th. A local landowner had passed by, destroying illegal rabbit traps when his dog made a beeline for the remains. Although the body was fairly decomposed and had been partially damaged by wildlife, the coroner was able to determine that Luby Geter had died of asphyxiation. Meanwhile, back on January 22nd, Luby Geter's friend, 15-year-old Terry Pugh, went missing. Pugh also lived in the same apartment complex as the killer's first victim, Teddy Smith. On the evening of the 22nd, Terry Pugh was seen turning in empty bottles for money at a depot on Memorial Drive in southeast Atlanta. Pugh used the money to treat himself to a meal at the Crystal restaurant. He finished his meal, exited the restaurant, and disappeared. A month later, an anonymous tip was phoned in to the police telling them where to find Terry Pugh's body. Wait, that's not happened before. Could this be a separate thing? The tip proved accurate. His remains were discovered in the woods in Rockdale County. This was approximately 20 miles from where Pugh was last seen. FBI profiler Ray Hazelwood suspected that the large distance between the abduction and the dump sites was a message from the killer that he could transport the victims as far as he liked, and there was very little the police could do about it. I mean, you gotta be feeling pretty fucking confident as a killer, right? You've killed 17 people, and they've got dick all on you. Both Luby Geter and Terry Pugh knew Patrick Patman Rogers. On February the 6th, 1981, a 12-year-old boy named Patrick Baltazar, that's a badass name, left the one-room apartment he shared with his father, stepmother, and two brothers in central Atlanta. Baltazar headed to his father's workplace, the Fisherman's Cove restaurant, to ask for money. Then Baltazar went to the 3 Galaxy arcade where he stayed until midnight. After that, Patrick Baltazar disappeared. A few weeks earlier, Patrick had phoned the police task force, telling them that he had been chased by a man and claimed that the man was, quote, going to get him. The police did not follow up on the call. Come on! Do your fucking jobs! You've got no leads! These are any lead, a shitty lead is enough, come on!
But that's simply not possible.
Why isn't it possible?
It's just not.
Why not, you stupid bastard?
Patrick Baltazar's body was found a week later on February 13th. He'd been dumped in some overgrown bushes in Corporate Square between the I-85 and Buford Highway. He was discovered by a maintenance worker. Head hairs belonging to a black man and dog hairs were found on the body. Patrick had been strangled with a ligature. 6 days later, on February the 19th, 13-year-old Curtis Walker was last seen picking up trash in exchange for money in front of the Byron gun shop. Sniffer dogs later tracked his scent to a parking lot behind a local school where a witness had seen a black teenager getting into a yellow car. Curtis Walker's body was discovered on March 6th, snagged on a log in the South River. I always thought, sorry, this is a completely random tangent, but this guy picking up trash and then handing it in to get money, I always think this is something that just seems to be massively underutilized. Why not just say, okay, look, people, if you bring a bag full of cigarette butts to wherever, the government office, we'll give you a little bit of money. And then everyone's just going to be doing litter picking. You know, if you lose your job or whatever and you can't drive Uber or whatnot, couldn't you or scraping gum off the streets. If you come, each piece of gum that is scraped off the streets will give you a bit of money. I don't know. Is that such a crazy idea? What's wrong with that? Because the streets, there's always gum everywhere and cigarette butts and come on. Curtis Walker's body was discovered on March 6th, snagged on a log in the South River. Police speculated he'd been dumped off the bridge rather than being pushed from the shoreline. He was naked except for his underwear. Later fingerprints were found on the body. Curtis Walker also knew Patrick Patman Rogers. Around this time, the police task force had received a tip that the murders were being carried out by a small cell of the KKK located in suburban Atlanta. Their leader was a man named Charles Theodore Sanders. An informant told police that, in late December, Sanders had threatened to murder Luby Geter after the boy hit Sanders' car with a go-kart outside the Stewart Lakewood Mall. The alleged statement was, quote, "I'm going to choke that black bastard to death with my dick." Yeah, that sounds like some KKK That's some fully racist stuff. But again, it is so far away from actually killing a child. A second informant claims that in February, Charles Sanders had told him, quote, "Yeah, I killed the little bastard. We are killing N-words, about 20 of them, and we're going to start killing young black women next." Okay, f*** it. Maybe this guy is a psycho.
But, I'm just going to come out and say it. This guy's a real jerk.
In response to these allegations, the police task force wiretapped Charles Sanders' phone and the telephones of his family and fellow KKK members. He's probably, I get the feeling they're going to fight. He's just talking a big game. He's just a piece of shit. He's just a standard cowardly piece of shit. His brothers, Terry and Don Sanders, were recorded having an incriminating conversation. Don Sanders allegedly said, "I might go out and ride around a little bit," to which Terry Sanders responded, "Go find you another kid, another little kid." Don answered, "Yeah, scope out some places. See you later." Bro, I was so wrong. I was so wrong. Jesus Christ. Meanwhile, on the evening of March 2nd, 1981, why was I f***ing defending the KKK? I mean, I wasn't. But I was just saying there's a big difference between that and murder. Fuck, man. Meanwhile, on the evening of March 2nd, 1981, 15-year-old Joseph Jojo Bell swung by Captain Pegg's seafood restaurant, where he occasionally did odd jobs for cash. Then Bell went and played a game of basketball with some friends in a public court. After the game, Joseph Bell's friends saw him get into a white station wagon with a black man in his mid-20s. One of Bell's friends, Eugene Laster, identified the man as a local talent agent. Eugene Laster's younger brother, John, claimed that Joseph Bell knew the agent's phone number. The next day, March 3rd, a staff member at Captain Pegg's restaurant got a phone call from Bell where he claimed to be, quote, nearly dead before the line was disconnected. 4 days later, March 7th, Bell's grandmother, with whom he lived, claimed she got 2 strange phone calls from an unidentified female saying that she, quote, had Joseph. Joseph Bell's body was found several weeks later, on April the 19th, by some mountain bikers testing a new trail through the woods in Rockdale County. The dump site was a 2-mile hike through the forest from the nearest road. The cause of death was determined to be asphyxiation, although the man who picked up Joseph Bell that night was identified as a local talent agent. Police did not seek to find him, question him, or add him to a suspect list. Guys, I don't even have words anymore.
You serious?
It appears that the eyewitness testimony of Joseph Bell's friends was ignored by the beat cops who questioned them, and they did not report the information to their superiors. Meanwhile, the task force was still preoccupied with their KKK lead, which isn't bad, at least they're doing something. The alleged statements by Charles Sanders and the incriminating telephone conversation between Terry and Don Sanders. Back on March 13th, 1981, 11 days after the disappearance of Joseph Bell, the grisly pattern continued. 13-year-old Timothy Hill had been close friends with Joseph Bell, and they lived in the same neighborhood. According to their mutual friends, after Bell's disappearance, Timothy Hill became more cautious whenever he left the house. He refused to talk to strangers. However, that precaution did not seem to apply to adults whom he already knew, which included a convicted sex offender named Thomas Uncle Tom Terrell, who owned 2 houses next door to each other on Gray Street. One of the houses was Uncle Tom's residence, the other was a flop house, where Uncle Tom encouraged young boys to hang out. Timothy Hill was run at one of them. Bro, go and arrest that sick. Adults would come to the flophouse on Gray Street in order to engage in sex with the boys for money. A witness, Frank Mealing, later admitted under police interrogation that he had sex with Timothy Hill and another underage boy at the Gray Street flophouse at 5 p.m. on March the 12th. Afterward, Hill went next door and spent the night in Uncle Tom's place of residence with Mealing and several other teenagers. Police, go sort this shit out. What is happening? Hill left the following morning, March 13th, 1981. He was last seen at 4 p.m., standing on a downtown sidewalk talking to an unidentified teenage girl. 3 days later, March the 16th, one of Timothy Hill's school teachers, Teresa Swindle, received 2 phone calls from the boy, during which he was crying and incoherent. That was the last contact anyone had with him. Timothy Hill's body was found washed up on the banks of the Chattahoochee River on March the 30th. He had been strangled to death. In addition to being friends with Joseph Bell, Timothy Hill was also friends with Patrick Baltazar, Anthony Carter, and may have known Alfred Evans, Jeff Mathis, and Eric Middlebrooks. Both Uncle Tom Terrell and Frank Mealing were investigated as suspects in the murders of Timothy Hill, along with the other children in Atlanta. Come on, Uncle Tom Terrell, even if he's not guilty of this murder, he's got to be guilty of some other horrible shit, so let's get him in prison as well, why not? And although they were eventually prosecuted for sex offenses, hell yes, there was no substantial evidence tying the 2 men to the actual killing. I mean, there's not. But it's good that they're going to prison for the sex offenses because they seem f***ing horrible. And they had alibis for many of the dates in question. In Uncle Tom's case, his alibis were often, can we just call him Terrell? Do we have to call him Uncle Tom? It sounds way too familiar for like a horrific sex offender. It was Terrell. In Terrell's case, his alibis were often teenage boys. Another predator without an alibi named Larry Marshall had reportedly had sex with Timothy Hill at the Gray Street flophouse on March the 9th. several days before Hill's disappearance. Larry Marshall was arrested and held for questioning, but was later cut loose as the murders continued. An unknown number of PDF files. Is that how we say the B word now? PDF files. That's a new one to me. They'd gone to the Flophouse on Grey Street over the years to exchange money for sexual services. It's possible that the killer was among them. There is also the strong possibility that the first two victims, Teddy Smith and Alfred Evans, had also frequented the Flophouse, having been seen there by eyewitnesses back in 1979. A number of other victims were rumored to have frequented Grey Street to have sex for money, but these reports were given to police and the media several months after the connection of Grey Street Timothy Hill had been made public. Too much time to distinguish fact from fabrication. 2 months after Timothy Hill's body was discovered, the Grey Street Flophouse was burned to the ground by a person or persons unknown. And to that, all we can say is, oh no, he burned down the horrible PDF file hangout sick location. I don't like this episode, David. There's lots of horrible shit in it. Evolution. In March 1981, famous heavyweight boxer Muhammad Ali donated $500,000 to the existing reward for information leading to the arrest of the Atlanta murderer, bringing the total to $600,000 or $2 million in modern money. Excellent. Legend. Numerous other celebrities like Burt Reynolds and Gladys Knight donated money to fund the operational costs of the large police task force. The city of Atlanta also accepted thousands in donations from the public. On March the 11th, jazz singers Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. put on a charity concert to raise even more money for the task force and financial support for the victims' families. At the charity concert, one of the on-stage photographers was a man named Homer Williams, whose son was an aspiring youth talent agent in Atlanta. Talent agent, Atlanta. At 7 p.m. on March the 20th, 1981, a few days after the disappearance of Timothy Hill, 21-year-old Eddie Duncan arrived home at the apartment he shared with his mother and 3 siblings. Eddie told his 18-year-old brother, Ricky, that he had been offered $200 to help a man move to South Carolina. A neighbor reported a slightly different story, claiming that Eddie Duncan told him around 10 p.m. that evening that he had been offered $200 to help paint a house. Police later hypothesized that both these stories were cover for a $200 fee for male prostitution. Yeah, that's immediately what I guessed. Eddie Duncan was last seen around 11 p.m. on a street corner, getting into a car with a light-skinned black man. Let me get, if Homer Williams' son is a light-skinned black man, that's going to be interesting. Eddie Duncan was found April 1st, 1981, on the shores of the Chattahoochee River, a few feet from where the body of Timothy Hill had been found merely a day earlier. Eddie had been strangled. At 21, around 5'9" and 140 pounds, he was the first victim to be a legal adult. Eddie Duncan knew both Timothy Hill and Patrick Patman Rogers. Back on March 22nd, 2 days after the disappearance of Eddie Duncan, 20-year-old Larry Rogers was seen getting into a faded green station wagon with a light-skinned black man on the corner of Simpson Road and Lake Avenue. Why is this changing? Why is the MO changing? Despite being a legal adult, Larry Rogers was only 5'2" and 110 pounds. Aside from a burn scar on the side of his face, he very much resembled a child. Well, there we go, because the MO didn't change. On April the 9th, the body of Larry Rogers was found on the floor of a kitchen in an abandoned apartment building. He had been strangled. Meanwhile, on March 25th, 23-year-old Michael McIntosh was last seen leaving his place of work at the Milton Avenue Foundry. McIntosh was only 5'5", 116 pounds. His peers deemed him mentally slow, and he was rumored to sometimes work as a male prostitute at the Cameo Lounge on Spring Street. McIntosh had done 3 years in prison from ages 18 to 21 for burglary and armed robbery. McIntosh knew victim Joseph Bell from a local boxing club. Michael McIntosh's body was found on April the 20th on the banks of the Chattahoochee, not far from where the remains of Timothy Hill and Eddie Duncan had been found. He'd been strangled. Eddie Duncan, Larry Rogers, and Michael McIntosh were all murdered within the space of a week. Duncan had been average height, average weight. Rogers and McIntosh had been smaller. They were all legal adults. Duncan and McIntosh had wound up in the river. Rogers had been found in an abandoned building. Strangulation was in all 3 cases. The task force added them to their caseload. A month passed. At 10:30 a.m., on April the 22nd, 21-year-old Jimmy Payne, 5'7", 137 pounds, was last seen walking to the Gold Mine Arcade to sell some collectible 1951 nickels that he'd acquired. He was a suspect in a coin shop robbery a few days earlier. Dude, come on. Payne had also recently been released from prison in December for a similar crime. Jimmy Payne did not know Michael McIntosh, and they'd served their sentences at different prisons. Payne was supposed to meet his ex-girlfriend, Catherine Turner, that afternoon, but he never showed up. Jimmy Payne's body was found in the Chattahoochee on April 27th by a fisherman and his wife. Payne had been strangled. What has changed the MO from being almost exclusively teenagers to now young adults? What changed? At this point, the task force deployed 100 officers to stake out every river crossing and vacant lot in the city in the hopes they'd catch the murderer dumping a body. The operation would be extensive, would require the importation of other officers from surrounding counties, and the mayor's office warned that the task force did not have the budget to continue for very long. On April the 23rd, the day after Jimmy Payne disappeared, 28-year-old John Porter was last seen walking away from his mother's apartment on Capitol Avenue. He was found the next day in a vacant lot on Bender Street, having been stabbed. John Porter had suffered mental problems for years, had previously been institutionalized. He's 28, and he was once accused of molesting a toddler. When Porter fought with his mother, he would go and stay in an abandoned apartment building with a bunch of shady characters, including an accused and acquitted murderer named James Oldman Gates. There were questions about whether John Porter fit the victim profile. He was 5'10", 160 pounds. He is 28 years old. This is not our dude. How much is 160 pounds? Siri, what's 160 pounds in kilos? For God's sake, so useless. He did not fit the pattern of smaller statured adults the killers had recently fallen into. Killers? Oh, killings. Sorry, I was like, ooh, do we know this too? Killings had recently fallen into, but then again, neither did 5'9" Eddie Duncan, and Jimmy Payne was slightly below average at 5'7", but it was borderline. John Porter had also been stabbed, not strangled, but so was 9-year-old Anthony Carter back on July 6, 1980. Finally, there was no clear indication whether or not Porter was involved in male prostitution, but mentally ill and frequently homeless, it was distinctly possible. Not wanting to miss any potential leads, the task force added John Porter to their list. Nearly 3 weeks passed. At 6 p.m. on May the 11th, 1981, 17-year-old William Barrett walked down to the McDaniel Glen Housing Center to pay a bill for his mother. A witness then saw him a few blocks away, getting into a white car with a black male. As an odd detail, according to the witness, the unidentified black male was carrying a purse. William Barrett was 5'5", 130 pounds. His body was found in a forested lot not far from his home the following day, May 12th. The victim had been strangled to death and then stabbed once post-mortem. Dog hairs were found on the body. 9 days, it just never ends, does it? It just never ends. And there's just no progress. It's just like lots of people being killed, not enough evidence being left behind, no witnesses, no one coming forward. Kids just keep dying. Well, now adults keep dying. 9 days later, 3 p.m., May 21st, 1981, 27-year-old Nathaniel Carter left the Falcon Hotel where he'd been staying since his parents threw him out of their apartment on April 24th. Carter was 5'10", 150 pounds. With a moustache and a goatee, he most assuredly did not resemble a child. Yeah, he's a 27-year-old man. During the day, Carter found work at a labor pool, lining up at 708 Spring Street for anybody who arrived with a truck or a van wanting to hire short-term unskilled labor for cash. At night, Carter worked as a male prostitute at the Silver Dollar Saloon and Cameo Lounge, both of which were also on Spring Street. At 9 p.m., Carter left the Cameo Lounge. At 9:30 p.m., a witness named Robert Henry saw Carter holding hands with a light-skinned black man in front of the Rialto Theater, approximately half a mile to the northeast of Spring Street. Then Nathaniel Carter disappeared. A few hours later, at 3 a.m. on May 22nd, a white station wagon was stopped after crossing the James Jackson Parkway Bridge. We're back at our start, are we? The officer at the scene had heard a splash. The driver of the station wagon was mid-20s, 5'6", 180 pounds, with large, thick glasses. He was a light-skinned black man with his hair in an afro. The man claimed to be a talent agent and was out that night trying to contact a prospective singer named Cheryl Johnson. This is our dude, right? The talent agent, light-skinned black dude, come on now. He denied stopping on the bridge or turning around on it. The man claimed the station wagon belonged to his uncle. When police conducted a search of the vehicle, they found leather gloves and a 24-inch nylon cord. The cops did not confiscate them and let the man drive home. The name on his driver's license was Wayne Williams. When police looked into Cheryl Johnson, they discovered she did not exist. Wayne Williams had been pulled over 3 days before the mayor's office had planned to pull the plug on the stakeouts. Wayne Williams also bore a striking resemblance to the witness sketch that was released to the media after the abduction of Luby Geeta back in January. On May 25th, the same day that the Atlanta Steakhouse was stopped, the body of Nathaniel Carter was discovered on the bank of the Chattahoochee River between the Jackson Parkway and George Street bridges had been strangled to death, bringing the death toll to 30 victims. How have I never... This guy has killed so many more people than some of the more famous serial killers that we've covered. This is just what... If I didn't know better, I'd almost be like, oh, this is just David made this one up. How have I never heard of this? Meet Wayne Williams. Wayne Bertram Williams was born in Atlanta, Georgia on May 27, 1958. His parents were Homer and Faye Williams, both of whom were school teachers. His father also occasionally worked as a freelance photographer. Both Homer and Faye were fairly intelligent people, and they passed that trait on to their son. Several times, Wayne scored above average on IQ tests. Homer and Faye diligently paid off a house in southwest Atlanta in Dixie Hills. At the time of Wayne's birth, it was a middle-class neighborhood composed of both white and black people. But as the 60s progressed, white flight turned it into a majority black neighborhood. Wait, I thought the white flight was to the suburbs. It sounds like this is a suburb, isn't it? The denizens of the inner city moved into the newly emptied houses. Then, during the 70s, drug use and crime rates significantly increased, rendering Dixie Hills a little different from the slums downtown. That's gotta suck. You kind of think gentrification only goes one way. In my mind, it's like, yeah, you buy something in an up-and-coming area, it's gonna get nice. Or you buy something in a nice area, it's gonna stay nice. But it could totally go the other way, which is like depressing. Having already paid off the house, Homer and Faye decided to stay put. They kept a clean and orderly home. Drug use and drunkenness was forbidden. There's no evidence that Wayne Williams was abused by his parents. His parents seemed like very, very decent people. But being an only child, there are indications that he was spoiled with excessive praise, attention, and expensive toys that were the envy of his friends. As he grew up, Williams developed a keen interest in electronics, music, radio, and journalism. At school, Williams was always top of his class. His teachers described him as intelligent, articulate, and polite. However, being short, chubby, and wearing glasses, Williams was swiftly dubbed a nerd by his peers and was occasionally bullied. I mean, sure, but it sounds like he's a successful kid from a nice family. Normally it's like, oh, he was horrifically abused by both of his parents. That's why he became a killer. And it's like, not in this guy's case. And remember, this is 30 victims. This is one of the worst people, so far, allegedly, that we've covered on this channel. He became something of a loner. In adolescence, Williams showed little sexual interest in either males or females. In 1976, Wayne Williams graduated from Frederick Douglass High School with the top grades in his class. Williams was also class president. He could have gotten into any university he wanted. He could have applied for a wide variety of scholarships, but instead Williams decided to continue living with his parents and to become, in his words, an entrepreneur. I mean, it's a little bit cliche, but he's a smart kid. He's like, this sounds like it could definitely be possible for him. After a year of sitting around the house, his parents convinced him to attend a few classes at Georgia State University in Atlanta, studying psychology and business administration part-time. Yeah, but also, I do think, I have a degree, I've got 2 degrees that I don't use, but I do value them. Going to university and getting a degree is just a great safety net. And I feel like, delay your entrepreneurship by 3 years, just go get a degree. And then you'll be, you've always got that to fall back on if it doesn't work. Not that I can fall back on it now. It's been a really long time. They'll be like, what's this gap on your CV? I was an entrepreneur. However, he fell short of earning his 4-year degree. Oh, degrees in America are 4 years, sorry. So 4 years is not a long time, for reasons that will soon become clear. As for his entrepreneurial ventures, Wayne Williams occasionally moonlighted as a radio repairman, a freelance photographer of fires and car accidents for the news, and he also floated around the local radio stations where he befriended a number of producers and announcers. After meeting a radio personality, he would steadfastly put their name down on his CV. Some of the people on that CV later claimed to have never met him. Williams also built a low-frequency radio antenna to make broadcasts of his own. His parents paid for the equipment, but the venture went nowhere. Williams was interested in music, particularly R&B, Motown, and soul, which was all the rage at the time, but he had no musical skills of his own, so he decided to become a talent agent. Yeah, I mean, you can enjoy music and be involved in the industry even if you're not musical yourself, you just know what's good music, or what people are going to enjoy. The primary focus of Wayne's recruiting efforts were young boys. He claimed that he was trying to discover the next Jackson 5. He wanted to call the band Gemini, after his astrological sign. His pattern of recruitment was to hand out flyers in South Atlanta offering free representation. When the boys reached out, he'd privately audition each one, and if they had talent, he'd cobble them together in a provisional band. He'd then record a demo of them singing or playing instruments and send it to various music producers that he claimed to know. Williams told the boys that once they were signed to a label, they would be paid incredible amounts of money. Sell that dream! Williams later claimed that he had contacted all the school music programs in Atlanta on his company letterhead and had an agreement with music teachers to scout for talent. However, no school staff came forward to corroborate this story, and no company letterhead has been found. Sounds like it's just doing the fake it till you make it. It's not cool, but it ain't murder. It seems likely that Williams just handed out flyers in local neighborhoods. It was all very small scale and could quite possibly just have been nothing more than a cover for his predatory sexual designs on children. But the demos were real. Williams recorded the boys in local studios around Atlanta. He paid for numerous recording sessions using his parents' savings. The sound editors who cut the tapes generally thought Williams was a bit of a joke, but they were happy to take his money. As far as we know, in adulthood, Williams had one girlfriend, a woman named Gwen Harden, whom he dated in 1980 and 1981, and who subsequently insisted that he was heterosexual. Williams was also rumored to frequent child brothels. Bruh. Like the one on Grey Street, or solicit male prostitutes in bars like the Silver Saloon or Cameo Lounge, but there's no way to confirm this. Look, Gwen, you could say, he's straight all you want, but that doesn't mean he's not bisexual.
Are you talking to me? Are you talking to me? Robert De Niro! Yeah. All right, this person pretend to be straight, but he's really gay. Me!
By his own admission, Wayne Williams was a night owl. He'd drive around for hours after dark. Frequently, he'd listen to a police scanner. If a call came through about a car accident or a fire, Williams would drive to the scene, take a few photographs, and then sell the best ones to the newspapers. In 1980, Williams bought a video camera and sold footage of fires and car accidents to local TV stations. But these pictures and tapes were infrequent, and it is unclear what else Williams was doing every night. Williams said he occasionally attended gigs and jam sessions. He did not attend many parties. His parents disapproved of his nocturnal habits, but they didn't stand in the way of them. Gotta say, again, his parents seem like really, really stand-up parents. Wayne Williams also had a fascination with the police. He had a few replica uniforms and kept a police light in his car. Back in 1976, shortly after graduating high school, he was arrested for impersonating a police officer. The charge was ultimately dropped, but theorists have speculated that Williams could have sometimes lured children into his car by pretending to be a cop. In his early 20s, Williams also several times falsely claimed to be a former Air Force pilot, or alternately an operative for the CIA, who, among other things, had been trained to kill with his bare hands. That sounds real, doesn't it? I'll be damned. After the body of Nathaniel Cater was found in the Chattahoochee River on May the 25th, 1981, the police task force felt certain that Wayne Williams... Oh my god, I just remembered. Dude, this is crazy. You know, sometimes when you don't remember your dreams and then something prompts it and you're like, oh my god, I had a dream about that last night. So I, just in case you didn't know by my change of t-shirt, or if you're listening to this as an audio podcast, I couldn't finish this yesterday. I ran out of time. I had to pick my kids up from school. So it's now the next morning, and I absolutely just remembered that I had a dream about this last night, and that I was dropping a body off of a bridge into a river. What the fuck, man? I don't like this. He may not have killed all 30 victims. Some of them could have been potentially victims of perpetrators with a similar MO, but the cops felt certain that Williams had killed at least some of them. FBI agent Ray Hazelwood declared that Wayne Williams fit the psychological profile to a T. Here, at any rate, after months of little progress and a rising body count, was a prime suspect worth investigating. Wayne Williams had been stopped at 3 a.m., half a mile from a bridge over the Chattahoochee, only a few hours after Nathaniel Cater was last seen holding hands with a light-skinned black man. The officer watching the bridge... By the way, I can't say... I have to say I'm quite happy that... I know it kind of spoils it a little bit because it's like Meet Wayne Williams was the title of the last chapter, but it's like I do like the fact that, because I didn't know it at first, that this guy is going to get caught. And they're... when was this set? When is this happening? Oh, the 80s, 90s? Oh, I shouldn't take a break. I shouldn't go home. I just ran out of time. Are they going to put a needle in his arm? Let's do it. The officer watching the bridge had heard a splash and seen a car. Wayne Williams, driving his uncle's white station wagon, was the only driver that the police could find in the area. Williams freely admitted to driving over the bridge, twice, back and forth, from a payphone. An officer had seen leather gubs and a nylon cord in the car, and the story Williams gave about Cheryl Johnson appeared to be bogus. None of this was enough to lay charges, but it was a good starting point. Seriously? I mean, wait, can you arrest someone without charging them? Right, you can, right? It's you arrested, then you're charged. I feel like there's definitely enough to arrest him. Let's get him interrogated, and hopefully he doesn't lawyer up, because, you know, casual criminalist, people are dumb. I get the feeling you will. But they're going to interview him. Let's get enough to charge him from that interview, police. Can we do that, please? It'd be nice to see some competence. Also, where's the FBI? Weren't the FBI going to get involved? Come on, FBI. The task force ran a background check on Wayne Williams and interviewed his neighbors, former classmates, acquaintances, and business associates. He didn't have any close friends. The cops avoided interviewing immediate family or Wayne's girlfriends or Wayne himself for the time being. I hope they're following him, because, I don't know, dude, if you're Wayne, what was his face? Williams, now is the time to flee.
And you think I did it?
Like, you have killed dozens of children and adults, and it is now time to, you're in Atlanta, dude, you gotta go south of the border. You gotta get to Mexico, and then from Mexico to some non-extradition territory. And if the police aren't worried about this, I don't know, you gotta be following him. You gotta track him. Most people describe Williams as nice, smart, ambitious, and friendly. It was hard. Why don't we know more about this guy? He sounds like, he sounds like a Ted Bundy-esque character, an absolute piece of shit. But for some reason, people latch onto his story because he's charming and handsome. It was hardly surprising to learn that a potential serial killer was able to maintain a fairly harmless public facade, yes. The task force tried to get a warrant to search the white station wagon that belonged to Wayne's uncle and the house where he lived with his parents. They could not find a judge willing to issue a warrant based on such limited evidence, and so, on June the 3rd, 1981, the police bit the bullet and invited Wayne Williams to an interview at police headquarters in downtown Atlanta. Williams was told it was merely a routine matter of procedure, since he was stopped on the night a victim disappeared, not far from where the victim's body was later found. Bruh, if you're not getting a lawyer at that point, it's just, I don't know, guys, just assume if the police ask you about something, you could be in trouble. I remember, I've told this story before, this was a decade ago now, I bought a drone off eBay, and I got it delivered, and this drone was broken, and I'm like, oh, crap. So I go through eBay's refund procedure, and 2-3 months later, I get an email from King Suffolk police in the UK, because I bought it off eBay in the UK. This was pre-Brexit, where you could just buy stuff from the UK and have it shipped, which was nice. I missed that. And I had it shipped over. Anyway, Suffolk police sent me an email. They're like, hey, did you buy this drone on so-and-so date? And I'm like, that was it. It was just one line from Detective so-and-so or Constable so-and-so. I don't quite remember who. And I'm just like, uh-oh, am I in trouble? Because it broke. I tried to get a refund through eBay. It didn't work. So I went to PayPal and said, yo, I want my money back. And PayPal just gave me the money back and didn't make me send the drone back because the guy never replied to me, which I was like, whoa, wait a minute. Did I steal that drone somehow? And immediately I think I'm in trouble. So I just messaged back, what's this about? Completely non-committal. Don't say anything. Just ask for more information. And they must have got my email address from eBay or something. So obviously there was an investigation going on into this. And it turns out that no, I wasn't in trouble. And the reason the guy hadn't replied to me is because he was in prison. He'd stolen these drones from a warehouse. And his plan wasn't just to sell them on eBay. He had stolen these drones so he could use them to fly drugs into prisons. And my theory is this one was broken and he thought, I'll just flog it on eBay. And he did, but he later got arrested and was sent to prison for, and there was a news article about this, for using drones to fly, they had stolen from a warehouse to fly drugs into prisons. And the police just wanted to know about that and whether I could give the drone back to the insurance company. And I just said to them, the insurance company's more than welcome to come and get it. And I kept it in my house for a few years and they never came, so I threw it away. Anyway, moving on. Williams agreed to attend and arrived on the evening of the 3rd, but the interview turned out to be anything but routine. He was interrogated for 12 hours. He denied having anything to do with the murders. When confronted with the non-existence of Cheryl Johnson, Williams changed his story, saying at the time that he wanted to supply the police with a plausible excuse in order to be let go, when in fact he was just driving around that night like he often did and was, quote, just curious as to what I could see in that area. It was certainly a flimsier excuse than Cheryl Johnson. Yeah, but they busted your Cheryl Johnson excuse. You could just be like, I feel that this is actually quite neatly done. You could just be like, yeah, I like to just decompress by driving sometimes. So, I don't know. And black dude getting pulled over by the police probably should have a better excuse than I'm just driving around. Because racism. The police asked Williams if he was willing to take a polygraph test, an extremely unreliable technology that law enforcement was still enamored with in the early 1980s. Williams agreed and promptly failed it. Visibly frustrated, Williams asked to retake the test, and he failed again. Now angry, he asked to take the test once more, and he failed. At that point, Richard Radcliffe, the FBI agent who administered the tests, turned to Wayne Williams and rather unwisely said, quote, I'll be damned. You're the guy we've been looking for these past 2 years. Bro, what are you doing? Like, this, what? You don't reveal your hand like that. Wait, why are you doing this? Wayne Williams left the police station just before dawn on June the 4th. Bro, like, it's time to flee now. I can't believe they let you go. The FBI guy, he's FBI, has just said, you're the guy. But we're going to let you go because we don't have enough evidence, which we're collecting. Time to flee, Mr. Williams. Wayne Williams left the police station just before dawn on June the 4th. A surveillance car followed him. Excellent. The police task force decided not to release his name or address to the public. Well, honestly, at this stage, where they're not sure and they've just done a polygraph test, which is bullshit, even though we know it's accurate in this situation, but, they've got like 51% reliability or something, so it's basically just a coin toss. Yeah, we shouldn't be releasing potential people's name to the public if we're not sure it's them. Because if it wasn't Wayne Williams, which it is, that would ruin that guy's, I was going to say day, but probably life. However, Wayne Williams had different ideas. After arriving home, he called the local media, explained that he'd been pulled in for questioning as a suspect in the Atlanta murders, and declared that he was going to hold a press conference in his parents' house later that morning. Within a couple of hours, at around 7 a.m., a handful of journalists arrived. One of the conditions of the interview was that they could not shoot footage of Williams' face and could not release his name. Instead, the cameras were pointed at the reporters themselves, asking rather awkwardly in the lace-festooned middle-class living room, and looking warily at the murder suspect off camera. It was an interesting strategy. Williams wanted to get out in front of any public allegations issued by the police. During the interview, Williams not so subtly implied that the police were corrupt, racist, and just wanted to pin the murders on him in order to close the case. Quote, one of the task force captains on the bridge pointed his finger at me and said that he was tired of all the BS about working long hours, working the stakeouts, and that he was ready to put the thing to an end. Dude, I have to say, for a guy who's not got a lawyer or a PR person working on this, I like the strategy. It's a good strategy. I mean, fleeing to Mexico would have been a better strategy, but, whatever. When asked about the children who had been murdered, Williams replied, some of those kids were in places they had no business being at certain times of day and night. Some of them don't have no home supervision and they're just running around the streets wild. And I'm saying that when you're doing that, not giving anyone a license to kill, but you're opening yourself up to all sorts of things. Again, like that sounds weird because we know he did it basically, don't we? But I think this is kind of like, not a double bluff, I don't know what you call it, where you say something that makes you look a little bit guilty because then people will think, oh, there's no way you could be guilty because he said that, right? I think this is actually a clever strategy and I think Wayne Williams is quite intelligent. Wayne Williams entered the press conference by demanding an apology from the police and the FBI. In response, the Atlanta Public Safety Commissioner, Lee Brown, was forced to give a statement. However, in order to keep things obscure and avoid any accusations that the police were harassing Williams, he told the media an outright lie. Brown said that the police believed that multiple predators had been responsible for the murders. Quoting him, based on all the experience and opinions of those who have consulted with us, we can say with certainty that we do not have one person responsible for the cases of missing and murdered children in our city. Behind the scenes, however, the task force was absolutely convinced that the perpetrator of most or all of the murders was Wayne Williams. He did not have a solid alibi for the dates and times of the 30 disappearances. His parents only gave him a partial alibi for the murder of Nathaniel Carter, saying that Wayne was home in the evening and left around 2:30 a.m. Under interrogation, Williams had simply replied that at the time of the various abductions, he was either at home, out driving, taking photographs of accidents, or conducting his business as a talent agent. He was never very clear about dates, times, or any strangers, friends, and acquaintances that he may have spoken to. Wayne Williams had already cleaned out his uncle's station wagon after being stopped on May the 22nd, smart, but following his press conference, neighbors saw Williams and his father painstakingly cleaning their house and carrying several cardboard boxes out to the car before driving off and returning several hours later without them. The next day, the neighbors smelled Williams and his father burning something in their backyard. The neighbors later claimed, judging from the noxious smell, that it was neither wood nor charcoal that they were burning. I mean, yeah, please, maybe you want to go in and stop this, because he is obviously destroying evidence, which is a good plan, but you should stop this. When the police task force got word that Williams and his father were potentially destroying evidence, they finally got a judge to grant them a warrant to search Williams' home and all the family cars. Yeah, you should probably be more subtle about destroying your evidence, though. Don't burn it in the garden. Just, I don't know, take those boxes. You could be subtle about it, or just, I don't know what you're burning, but just like, I don't know, burn it in a little bucket on the countertop and use the extractor fan. Like, just burn it slow. You got time. You take the time. Like, there's better ways to destroy evidence. They found blood residue in the house and the white station wagon. Well, you didn't clean it that well, did you? It was a few years before DNA testing, but it could be matched to blood type. Problem was, there were 30 victims with a variety of blood types. It didn't prove much. The police also took fiber samples from the various carpets in the house and hair samples from the Williams family dog, a German Shepherd. Oh, the word dog hairs left at several of the scenes, right? Meanwhile, the friends of murder victim Joseph Bell identified Wayne Williams as the man in the white station wagon who had picked him up from the baseball court on March the 2nd. Williams was also known to hang out at Cap and Peg seafood restaurant, where Bell occasionally found work. Under questioning, the sound editors at the various studios where Williams recorded his child star demos claimed that on several specific dates at the height of the murders, they saw him with scratches on his arms and face. These wounds would be consistent with the victim resisting while they were manually choked to death. Indeed, some of the victims had been throttled with bare hands. One sound editor, Kathy Andrews, told police that when she asked Williams about the deep gouges on his arms, he told her that he fell in a bush. Andrews got creeped out and avoided him after that. Sounds like Kathy has a good sense for psychos. Williams was also connected to murder victim Patrick Patman Rogers, having told Rogers a week prior to his disappearance that he'd like to record a demo of him and his musical partner, Joe Harper. Rogers gave Williams' name to Joe Harper's mother, Mary, the day he disappeared. Patrick Rogers, meanwhile, was either the friend or acquaintance of several other murder victims and may have introduced Wayne Williams to them. Williams was also directly connected to 20-year-old victim Larry Rogers, no relation to Patman. He knew Larry from the neighborhood and had driven his younger brother to the hospital after Larry's sibling had been injured in a fight. Meanwhile, forensic analysts matched the fibers from a carpet in the Williams' family home to fibers found on the shoe of Eric Middlebrooks when he was found dead in an alleyway on May 19th, 1980. Dude, there is no fucking way that you're going to get away with this. Like, they just need to pin one child murder on you, and you're either getting a needle in your arm or you're going away forever, and you've got 30 victims. There's just no fucking shot. There's just no chance you're getting out of this. Like, the evidence can be as circumstantial as you want, but there's just going to be so much of it for so many different murders. It was a highly distinctive trilobal fiber that could only be matched to a limited number of carpets at the time. Police tracked down the manufacturer to see how many such carpets were produced and sold in Atlanta to strengthen the significance of the match. Not many, was the answer. After the police searches, Wayne Williams' name and address were leaked to the public. The media started running the information. Within a few hours, Williams' street in Dixie Hills was clogged with news vans from all over the country. Too late to flee now, isn't it? A gaggle of reporters gathered perpetually outside his front door. A few reporters had come from as far as Europe. Also posted outside his home were officers from the Atlanta PD and agents from the FBI. Authorities did not deem Williams a flight risk and did not consider it likely that Williams would try to slip away and claim another victim under such intense press and public scrutiny. Nevertheless, the FBI placed tracking devices, still a relatively new technology in those days, on the Williams family cars. For several days, Wayne Williams stayed cloistered at home. Did they know that they had tracking devices put on their cars? Or not? Because if yes, not useful, other than in case he tries to flee. If no, then incredibly useful. Occasionally, Homer Williams would pop outside and tell reporters to stop trampling the grass. At one point, Wayne Williams came outside and threatened to sue the reporters for harassment. Then, at night, Williams started taking little drives with a long convoy of news vans and police vehicles following behind him. Williams would drive around aimlessly for a few hours and return home. Then, on June 18th, Wayne Williams left his house and drove to the home of Maynard Jackson, Atlanta's mayor. Williams drove at high speed, and the usual convoy struggled to keep up with him. He got out of his car and stood in the street shouting at the mayor's front door about how he was allowing the harassment of a private citizen. The mayor did not come outside. Yeah, because the mayor... Dude, can you imagine being in that situation? Of course you don't go outside. Williams later said of his impromptu protest, quote, "When you're trying to get into your own home and you have literally to fight your way through a sea of people, it gets frustrating." Neither the mayor nor the police task force wanted this circus to continue for much longer. And so, on June 21st, 1981, Wayne Williams was arrested for the murder of 28-year-old Nathaniel Cater, who had gone missing on May 22nd. The same night, Williams was stopped on the bridge, and 21-year-old Jimmy Payne, who had gone missing the morning of April 22nd, 1981, and had also wound up strangled in the Chattahoochee River. The district attorney intended to use the rest of the victims as pattern evidence at trial, and the DA fully intended to prosecute those cases should his office fail to secure the death penalty or lengthy convictions for the murders of Payne and Cater. Yeah, so it's like, we're going to try with these ones. If we don't get what we want, we're just going to do another trial, and we're just going to go through all the victims until eventually you get cooked. And by cooked, I mean electrocuted or lethal injection. And so it is with some irony that the only two cases which were going to be prosecuted in the so-called Atlanta child murders involved the homicide of two adults. Sons of bitches. Wayne Williams was arraigned at Fulton County Court and denied bail. His trial did not begin until half a year later, January the 6th, 1982. While Williams was behind bars, the newspapers triumphantly declared that the murders fitting the Atlanta killer's MO had ceased, which implied that the cops had got their man. Whether or not this is true has been debated, both now and at the time. Some commenters have suspicions that the cops just pinned the murders on the first likely suspect they came across. Bruh, yeah, but what about all of the evidence? The fibers, the fact he was there, he made up that excuse. I mean, he burning all that evidence in his garden. Guys, I mean, let's talk about, people are debating this now when reasonable doubt isn't a thing. Do I think there's reasonable doubt? Yeah, possibly. I need to see what happens in court. But in terms of does it seem like he did it? Hell yes. And they point toward a number of murder victims in Atlanta during the rest of 1981. In regards to African-American minors, 16-year-old Clarence Davis was shot in what appeared to be a gang dispute in October. Well, that's completely different. And 17-year-old Kenneth Johnson, an employee at Cap and Peg Seafood Restaurant, was shot in the middle of the street for reasons unknown in November. Well, this completely is outside of his MO, so that doesn't seem very likely, does it? The only thing that ties them together is... Wait, is Clarence a girl or a boy? Clarence? Is Clarence a girl's name or a boy's name? I'm assuming a boy for now. Okay, but the only thing that ties it to him is the fact that they're teenagers and boys. But they got shot, possibly one in a gang dispute and another one for reasons unknown. That's not what he was doing. Some theorists point towards the significance of the Johnson murder, that's the second guy who got killed, because of cap and pegs. And while strangulation was the Atlanta killer's most frequent MO, the very first victim back in 1979, Teddy Smith, had also been shot. Oh yes, Smith was dumped next to Alfred Evans, who had been strangled, making it highly unlikely that Smith was on the task force list erroneously. On the other hand, in November 1981, Kenneth Johnson had been murdered on the spot rather than abducted, used for sexual gratification, and then dumped elsewhere. Thus, the shooting did not fit the Atlanta killer's primary motive. As for adults who were murdered between July 1981 and January 1982, there were 10 such victims that fit the young and African-American profile. Most of them were shot, 2 of them were stabbed, and an unidentified black female in her 20s was found strangled in September. But again, female in her 20s is not his MO. Near the Crystal restaurant where Terry Pugh was last seen. But again, she had been killed where she lay, and the murderer had left bodily fluids on the corpse. Then there was 18-year-old Kevin Alexander, a student at Georgia Tech, who was bludgeoned to death in his dorm room in November, and his personal effects were stolen, but not his roommates. The death is certainly suspicious, but there's nothing else connecting it specifically to the Atlanta child murders. No, these are just other murders that happened around the same time, because it's a big city. There's gonna be murders. Perhaps of the greatest interest was 21-year-old Stanley Murray, the uncle of victim Curtis Walker, who was shot near Bankhead Highway and the location where Curtis disappeared, but Stanley was also killed on the spot. It could have also been an attempt to silence a witness, but there's no supporting evidence for that theory. Another alternative is that in June 1981, the killer simply ceased operations or moved elsewhere in order to let Wayne Williams take the fall. Yeah, dude, if that is the case, that whoever was doing it is like, god damn, okay. Gonna stop now, gonna go somewhere else and become a new serial killer with a slightly different MO. Meanwhile, for 6 months, Williams was isolated in a special wing of Fulton County Jail rather than kept in Gen Pop to prevent other inmates from murdering an accused child killer and PDF file. Williams was kept under 24 hours of observation and allowed to exercise for 1 hour every day. He had no visitors except for his lawyers. Not even his parents or his girlfriend visited him. Oh no, that's so sad. Oh, Wayne. Oh no! I mean, yeah, but he would have a horrible time in Gen Pop. Can you imagine? He's murdering children, and he's a predator and a PDF file. He's gonna get murdered. Oh no! Usually at pre-trial, defense lawyers for a serial killer attempt to get the location changed since the jury may be stacked with citizens who are highly prejudicial after hearing about the case in the local media for months on end. In this instance, Wayne Williams' lawyers declared that they were perfectly happy to hold the trial in Fulton County, aka Atlanta, since the jury would be composed of, quote, people from his hometown. Wait, people from his hometown where he was murdering their children? What the fuck? This meant black people. Oh, okay. Yeah, but he was murdering black kids. I don't think... Wait, is he going to get more slack from a black jury? I don't know. Wait, he was murdering black kids! Defense felt odds were better with a majority black jury than being judged by white people from the suburbs or regional areas. I mean, okay, fair, I don't understand racism. Like, I don't know, okay, fine. Some of the newspapers voiced concerns the majority black jury might acquit Williams for quote-unquote purely racial reasons, as had reputedly happened as a form of protest in other criminal cases, but the prosecution said that this would not be a factor. Williams had harmed children and young men from the black community itself. They would not be so forgiving. You're goddamn right.
You're goddamn right.
In the end, the jury selected from Fulton County was 2/3 black, 1/3 white. 9 out of 12 were women, 3 were men. Judge Clarence Cooper, an African-American, would preside. Am I thinking of Candace? Clarence is a dude's name. Candace is a girl's name. The prosecution's contention was that Wayne Williams was a grandiose narcissist, a psychopath, a fantasist liar in a PDF file. He targeted members of his own race, as most serial killers do, perhaps out of sexual preference, but also because he felt contempt for the inhabitants of inner-city Atlanta. It was easy to dehumanize impoverished and often delinquent youths who were going nowhere fast, unlike the oh-so-intelligent and respectable Wayne. The prosecution also argued that Wayne was a repressed homosexual who initially targeted children because they were easier to deceive and less likely to fight him off. As Williams got bolder, wait, he's a repressed homosexual? He doesn't seem very repressed. Seems like a fucking sicko. As Williams got bolder, he graduated to young men, particularly sex workers. Even then, many of his adult victims still resembled teenage boys. The prosecution argued that the 2 female victims, aged 7 and 12, had not yet hit puberty and developed secondary sex characteristics, making it possible they also sufficiently looked like boys. However, it was clear Williams' preference was for males, which is why they formed the overwhelming majority of his roster of victims. Judge Cooper ruled that details from the other murders could be used as pattern evidence. This was not unusual in Georgia at the time. The prosecution decided to focus on the male victims since Williams was the least likely to have actually killed the 2 female ones. The prosecution presented as evidence the fairly unique carpet fibers found on Eric Middlebrooks' body that matched a carpet in the Williams family home. The manufacturer confirmed only a few dozen people in Atlanta owned them. The prosecution also displayed 19 fibers found on 12 other victims, including Nathaniel Carter and Jimmy Payne. They matched the lining of the back of the station wagon, implying that it was regularly used to transport victims. God, we are slipping away from reasonable doubt, aren't we? Those fibers were more common, but Wayne Williams being stopped in such a vehicle with a potential body dump was compelling. Blood residue found in the station wagon and the Williams family home matched the blood type of some of the victims, but with 30 victims, blood type could only tell you so much. However, the presence of such a variety of blood in the car and the house at all was potentially incriminating. How does this work? If, let's say, God forbid, he gets acquitted, because they're like, it's just not strong enough. We don't know if the blood's from the victims. And obviously the FBI have a big warehouse where they've got little cut-offs of that carpet or wherever the blood is and the blood of the victims. And they're like, guys, it's 2024. Let's just run this through the computer and get the DNA analyzed in 20 minutes. Or however long it takes, I don't know. It's usually quite quick, isn't it? Like where you spit in a cup and send it to Ancestry DNA. It takes them a week, and this is the police. So if he was acquitted, right? And then they go back and they're like, it turns out the DNA did match all of the victims. Can they then go and arrest him and prosecute him, or is he protected by that he's already had a trial and been acquitted double jeopardy thing? Is that actually a real thing? I mean, I know it's not like in that movie where the woman's going to kill her husband in Times Square or whatever, but I don't know what happens there. Dog hairs found on the bodies of Charles Stevens, Patrick Balthazar, William Barrett, and most decisively of all, Nathaniel Cater, were determined to belong to a German Shepherd, the same breed of dog owned by the Williams family. Can DNA that dog as well nowadays. Furthermore, head hairs found on Patrick Balthazar closely resembled those from Wayne Williams' afro. Meanwhile, Balthazar had kept his hair cut short. Eugene Laster, a friend of Joseph Bell, testified that Williams picked up Bell from the basketball court in a white station wagon the day that he disappeared. Numerous witnesses came forward to attest that Wayne Williams was a homosexual who frequented cruising spots and flop houses. To counter this, the defense later called Williams' girlfriend to testify that he was as straight as an arrow. I mean, this is not reliable. She can be like, no, he's straight. Yeah, to you, but that doesn't mean he doesn't have other inclinations. The prosecution's final witness was a man named Robert Henry, who testified that he saw Nathaniel Cater with Wayne Williams in front of the Rialto Theatre the night Carter disappeared. Quote, they were holding hands, like male and female. If you're holding hands with one of my co-workers and you are both male, what am I supposed to do? Turn my head? Yeah, maybe. I know it's the 1980s, but these days you'd just be like, oh, okay, interesting, didn't know. Under harsh cross-examination, where the defense brought up his criminal record, Robert Henry stuck to his story and insisted that he was positive that it was Carter and Williams he had seen that night, and the jury found him credible. The prosecution argued that it was significant that not a single one of the victims owned a car. Therefore, it made it easy for Williams to offer rides late at night, or to talent auditions or demo recordings, or to perform some odd jobs Williams had fabricated as pretext. One notable witness was a sound recordist who claimed that Williams often referred to the kids he brought in for demos as, quote, drop shots. In local parlance, this meant scum, ghetto trash, hood rats, or people who were worthless and below any sympathy or consideration. That's pretty psycho. Like, what? They're still f***ing people. The defense lawyers certainly had their work cut out for them, especially for court-appointed attorneys who had never properly tried a murder case before. Oh my god, can you imagine going into your first murder case and it's a serial killer who's killed 30 children? You'll be like, I'm a little over my head, Judge. They did not call any expert witnesses to refute the fiber, dog hair, or blood evidence. They merely argued on cross-examination that the fibers, dog hair, and blood could have come from anywhere, which is true, but you usually want to back that up with an expert who could speak convincingly about the probabilities involved. Yes, maybe they couldn't find an expert because all the experts were like, seems pretty likely that it was him. And they're like, you're for the defense. They're like, yeah, I can't lie, dude. It's him. The defense called very few witnesses, none of whom could provide a solid alibi for the time span during which Jimmy Payne disappeared. But Williams' parents, Homer and Faye, testified that Wayne was with them on the evening of the 21st when Nathaniel Cater was last seen and had only left the house at 2:30 a.m. on the 22nd, shortly before Williams was stopped by police. But this alibi didn't cover the full period of Cater's disappearance, and it was not considered beyond the realm of possibility that Williams' parents would lie under oath to protect their only child. Yeah, I don't think parents are reliable alibis. It should be a factor to consider, but you should generally assume that a parent is going to lie to protect their child, even if their child is a murderer of 30 children. Don't protect your children. Jesus. Then Wayne Williams decided to take the stand in his own defense. Uh-oh. He testified for 3 days. For the first 2 days, Williams was polite and soft-spoken, several times being required to repeat his answer so the jury could hear. He went over what happened on the James Jackson Parkway Bridge and denied knowing either Nathaniel Carter or Jimmy Payne. He also denied picking up Joseph Bell from the basketball court, claiming that he'd been misidentified. Due to Williams' soft demeanor, several reporters began to speculate whether such a man could have really killed all those victims. Those reporters, you're not familiar with the, people wearing a mask? Like, serial killer. He's a serial killer. He wears a mask. But on the third day of his testimony, Williams began to get agitated. When the prosecution asked him about Robert Henry seeing him with Nathaniel Cater, Williams shouted, "I told you that I don't hold hands with no man, nowhere." When the prosecution implied that Williams was a killer who hid behind a harmless facade, Williams yelled, "Do you want the real Wayne Williams? You got him, you drop shot." The effect of these words on the jury was poisonous. Yeah, dude, come on. This is what, don't take the stand. I can't believe his lawyers would encourage him to do this. He must have insisted upon it. Just listen to your fucking lawyers. Don't take the stand. Don't. It'll go well when your lawyer's up there talking to you and you think, oh, it's going so well. But then the prosecution's lawyer will come up and they will destroy you because that's what they do. Listen to your lawyer. On February the 26th, 1982, the jury went into deliberations. They took 11 hours to return the verdict that Wayne Williams was guilty of the first-degree murder of Nathaniel Cater and Jimmy Payne. A week later, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. Excellent! No death penalty, come on. Reasonable doubt. Since his conviction, Wayne Williams has steadfastly maintained his innocence. In one interview from prison, he said, "The bottom line is that nobody ever testified or even claimed that they saw me strike another person, choke another person, stab, beat, hurt, or kill anybody, because I didn't." Yeah, honestly, eyewitnesses though, I don't even care. Like, I'm much more interested in the hard evidence, because that is much more solid than eyewitness testimony. Of course, it does not take a direct eyewitness to convict someone of murder. Of course it doesn't. In some cases, you don't even need the victim's body. In Williams's case, there was a fairly significant amount of circumstantial evidence. Even if you remove the pattern evidence, aka the details about other murder victims for which Williams was not on trial, there was arguably enough for a jury to convict him for the murder of Nathaniel Cater. A witness spotted Cater holding hands with Williams that night. He was on the bridge at 3 a.m. upstream from where the body was found. An officer at the time reported he heard a splash. Williams's explanation being out that night was a lie. Fibers matching the vehicle and Williams's dog were found on the body. He had no alibi, a nylon cord and leather gloves in the car, which disappeared, and Williams and his father were seen removing potential evidence. On the other hand, if you exclude the pattern evidence, there was considerably less for a jury to convict Williams for murdering Jimmy Payne on beyond a reasonable doubt. Nobody had seen them together. They were not previously acquainted or connected by mutual associates like some of the other victims. There was no dog hairs on Jimmy Payne's body, only fibers from a station wagon, and plenty of people owned station wagons in 1981. Beyond that, all you have is Williams lacking an alibi and the modus operandi being the same as Cater's murder. A jury would be forgiven for not sending a man to prison purely based on that evidence. Yeah, honestly, we've just sat here for like an hour and a half or whatever, and been through all of this. But that's not what the jury were considering. Sure, there was the pattern evidence, but the jury was considering this case. And I kind of think there's probably reasonable doubt there. Do I want there to be? No, but if I was on the jury, I don't know if I'm convinced. Beyond reasonable doubt. But pattern evidence was permitted. And it is only when you see the evolving victim profile, that the numerous body dumps, the recurring MO, and the same station wagon fibers on many of the victims, that it becomes more feasible to convict Williams for the murder of Jimmy Payne. All right, yeah, well, pattern evidence, there we go. David said that it was allowed back then, which kind of implies that it's not allowed today, which is interesting. He was one part of a larger constellation of killings. And let's not kid ourselves, although Cater and Payne's murders were the only charges, this was very much a trial for all the so-called Atlanta child murders. The media certainly treated it as such, and in many ways, so did the people in that courtroom. In my personal opinion, after writing up a number of criminal cases over the years, I am wary of the practice of introducing pattern evidence, or propensity evidence, or whatever you'd like to call it. Essentially, bringing up unproven accusations of other crimes the defendant may have committed that have not been tried and tested in a court of law. Too often, it seems to be used as a tactic by the prosecution to poison the jury against the defendant when the evidence for the actual case being tried seems to be lacking. Pattern evidence often is, to quote a Supreme Court judge, more prejudicial than probative. Okay, and I'm saying that as someone who thinks Wayne Williams is quite likely guilty. Yeah, okay, I see both sides of the argument there, and I get why it was kicked out as an option. Nevertheless, some people go much further than me. After the verdict was handed down, a large segment of the American public, particularly in Atlanta, suspected that police just pinned the murders on Wayne Williams to quell social unrest. Indeed, all of the child murder cases associated with Williams were closed after the trial. This ended investigations that may have found a different culprit for some of the victims. Well, that's not very good. Particularly those that did not seem to fully conform to the victim profile or the strangulation and dumping MO, potentially letting other monsters get away with murder and go on to hunt more children. The idea of Wayne Williams as a fall guy was the view of a sizable minority of black Americans of black Atlantans in 1982, and remains so today. In fact, the number of people who suspect that Wayne Williams is innocent of some or all of the murders has arguably grown since then. After the shock, horror, and desire to put an end to the killings has finally faded. Well, why can't we just test the DNA? It's the future. Run the DNA. I feel like you run the DNA and it's going to be like, okay, cool. Yeah, it was him. Great. Spend the small amount of money that it takes to do that, police. And the killings largely stayed ended. As mentioned, the Atlanta murders that fit the MO and the victim profile petered out after Williams' arrest in June 1981. This remained the case in 1982 and 1983. There were no strangulations within the victim profile, just shootings and stabbings. However, the shooting of Charles Watson in April 1982 is worth mentioning. A few weeks prior, he went to the Atlanta PD claiming that he knew of a child prostitution ring. The cops were going to use Watson as an informant. Then he suddenly fled to Texas. On April the 5th, a witness saw a group of three unidentified men break into Watson's Houston apartment, beat him up, and shoot him in the back of the head. If the Atlanta child murders were somehow connected to a wider PDF file ring beyond the flophouse on Gray Street, then it is possible Charles Watson was a witness, or else Gray Street may have simply been frequented by Wayne Williams, and that is where he met a few of his victims. Then there's Nathaniel Cater. In the years after the trial, new witnesses came forward claiming that they'd seen Cater after the night of May 21st to May 22nd. Two patrons of the Cameo Lounge claimed to have seen him there on the afternoon of the 23rd, and a friend of Cater's named Jimmy Tightrope Anthony claimed that he spoke to Cater in Central Park on the morning of the 24th. This puts Cater alive after Williams was stopped on James Jackson Parkway Bridge. Another one of Cater's friends, John Henley, came forward claiming he saw Williams with Cater on May 26th, but then Henley remembered that Cater was found dead on May 25th and he recanted his statement. Nevertheless, yeah, I think people can just get confused, though. They're just like, oh, wait, maybe no, actually it was Tuesday. My bad.
What year is it?
It was brand new.
No. What year is it?
Nevertheless, in some people's opinion, the three witnesses claiming to have seen Cater alive after May 22nd shouldn't be enough reasonable doubt to overturn Williams's conviction. Judge for yourselves. Then there's Jimmy Payne, who disappeared on the morning of April 22nd after he went out to sell some of his 1951 nickels that he was suspected of robbing at gunpoint from a coin collector. The police were looking into it. Rumors circulated that Payne had been trying to buy a fake identity card just prior to his death and go on the run before he could be arrested. But perhaps Payne had fallen afoul of a criminal associate. Two witnesses also came forward to dispute the time of his disappearance. One had seen Payne in a nightclub on the 23rd, the other in a rare coin store on the 24th. Then Payne was found dead in the Chattahoochee on the 27th. Given there wasn't a lot of evidence connecting Williams to Payne in the first place, perhaps all of this would have been enough for reasonable doubt if it had been brought up at trial. Yeah, his lawyers didn't do a very good job, did they? He's getting on the stand, they're not bringing up all this reasonable doubt. I don't know. Do I think he did it? Hell yeah. Do I think he should have got off on reasonable doubt in that specific case? Yeah, maybe. I think he would have if he had better lawyers. But then they'd just go down the list and get that evidence and just find something to get him away for life, right? At least that's my hope. Then there's 13-year-old Clifford Jones, who was murdered on August the 20th, 1980, and whose body was found behind a shopping mall dumpster on August 21st. He had been strangled. A white sex offender had been identified as a suspect, but a solid alibi cleared him. Then, 3 teenagers claimed to have seen a black man named Jamie Brooks alongside an unidentified accomplice sexually assault and murder Clifford Jones in a laundromat. The teenagers claimed to have seen the entire thing through a window. Oh, right, yeah, I remember this from earlier. And also saw Brooks wiping down the body. 2 additional witnesses claimed that they saw Jamie Brooks dump the body behind the dumpster. Around the time of Wayne Williams' trial, Jamie Brooks was arrested on another charge of assault with attempt to rape, but was acquitted. A few years later, Jamie Brooks died of AIDS. Since then, rumors have circulated that Brooks also frequented the Silver Dollar Saloon and Cameo Lounge, and both knew Nathaniel Cater and Michael McIntosh. So here, at any rate, is an alternate perpetrator of the Atlanta child murders. It just requires a lot of evidence pointing at Wayne Williams to be entirely coincidental. Yeah, but coincidental is exactly the sort of argument that a good defense attorney would make. It's really an unfortunate coincidence, guys. It's not him, he's just really unlucky. Speaking of alternative culprits, here's the 2 statements made by KKK leader Charles Sanders and the incriminating telephone conversation between his 2 brothers, Don and Terry. Charles told a police informant he was going to kill Luby Geter for hitting his car with a go-kart a month before Geter's death. Then in February, Sanders told a second informant that he killed Geter and went on to say that the KKK had killed about 20 black children and would start killing black women next. Take it all back about the KKK. I was like, no, they're just racist. They're not murdering children. Oh no, they're racists who murder children. Indeed, the death toll at the time was around 20, but the killings did not evolve to include adult women. They turned toward adult men. Meanwhile, Terry and Don Sanders had a wiretapped phone conversation where Don talked about riding around and looking for black kids. The recording has since been deleted by the Georgia Bureau of Investigations. Although the police tried to find evidence against the Sanders brothers for months in early 1981, they never found anything. The Sanders brothers had a smattering of alibis for some of the murders, and most of the task force agreed there was no way in hell 3 white KKK members could patrol inner city Atlanta for 2 years unnoticed. Yeah, it just sounds like these guys are talking some racist bullshit. I don't know. They just seem to be arseholes. The statements by Charles Sanders have largely been dismissed as a racist arsehole spouting hot air, if they happened at all. As for the recorded phone conversation between Terry and Don Sanders to quote-unquote scope out some places to get a black kid, years later a fairly simple explanation came to light. The Sanders brothers, local KKK members who for many years had been under periodic observation, knew that they'd been wiretapped and were with the police. Yeah, I mean, fair. I think that's probably what's happened. I think that's probably what happened. Because if you know that if there's any vague suspicion of wiretap, you would not have that sort of conversation over the phone. It'd be like, this is a phone, this is a conversation we have in person. Another theory for the Atlanta child murders is they were part of a much larger conspiracy, a PDF file ring. Certainly, the connection of Timothy Hill and possibly Joseph Bell, Teddy Smith, and Alfred Evans to the flophouse on Gray Street might imply such a thing, but it doesn't account for all of the murders. Most of the male child victims do not have a proven connection to Grey Street. The flophouse catered exclusively to homosexual PDF files, so that excludes the 2 female victims. And it certainly does not explain the murder of 6 adult victims. Although 2 of them were sex workers at local clubs, there is no evidence that any of them attended Grey Street in their youth. In the years since, there has been nothing connecting. Oh God, Uncle Tom, that guy. I don't remember what he did, but I remember thinking I don't want to call him Uncle Tom because it sounded too familiar because he was a real piece of shit. Was he the guy who ran that underage flophouse brothel? Terrell. What a piece of shit. I hope he goes to prison. Or any of his known associates to outright abduction and murder. Terrell's MO was to invite impoverished teenagers to his flophouse, give them drugs, and encourage them to engage in sex for money. Yes, it was this piece of shit. He was never known to abduct preteen kids directly off the street as they played or walked to the shops to buy their mother some groceries. It is much more likely that Wayne Williams frequented Grey Street, along with luring kids with his talent agent business. That talent business connected Williams to a lot more victims like Patman Rogers, who, as far as we know, had nothing to do with Grey Street. However, if Wayne Williams was somehow involved in a wider PDF sex ring, then it might explain why Williams and his father had to transport boxes and boxes of stuff, possibly pornography, out of their house and burn even more stuff in their backyard. The thought is all the more unsettling when you consider that Homer and Faye Williams were both school teachers. Even if there was no sex ring involved, you've got to ask yourself, what exactly were Wayne and Homer burning? What was in those boxes? And why was blood residue found inside the Williams family home and fibers from a unique rug found on the shoes of Eric Middlebrooks? Because he did it, didn't he? That's why. Were the victims in the house at some point, as this would imply that Homer and possibly Faye knew something about their son's activities. The fact that the father was helping him get rid of the boxes and burn stuff in the garden means that if he didn't know about it before, he's definitely going to know something about it then, isn't he? You imagine it's like, yo, Dad, I've got all this really incriminating shit in my bedroom. Can you help me burn it in the garden? What sort of incriminating shit, son? Just burn it with me, Dad, for God's sake. It's better you don't know, Dad. Fucking hell. Finally, there is the consideration that maybe Wayne Williams killed some, but not all of the victims. Perhaps he only killed the adults and used a similar MO to the previous child murders. But the matching fibers and dog hairs on some of the child victims make this unlikely, as do the connections that William had with kids via his talent agency and eyewitnesses placing him with Joseph Bell. But certainly, questions could be raised about the 2 female victims, Angel Lanier and LaTonya Wilson, the latter of whom was abducted right out of her apartment by 2 men, one of whom may be white, and 10-year-old Darren Glass, who was snatched from the street and knew some of the other victims, but his body was never found. Yeah, dude. Police, you can't just be like, oh, we got the guy, so we're not going to look into any of these other things that we vaguely think might be related to him. Don't do that. These seem very different and should be investigated separately because there could be 3 other potential murderers hanging around. That makes it difficult to match his death with the strangle and dump MO. Also, John Porter was the eldest victim at 28 and much larger than Williams at 5'10 and 160 pounds. He was found stabbed, not strangled, in a vacant lot. Porter had mental illness and often lived in an abandoned apartment building with some shady characters, including a convicted murderer. In such a vulnerable and precarious position, a number of fates could have befallen him, and eventually, John Porter was removed from the force's official list. Ultimately, the only man who could know the answers to all these questions is Wayne Williams, and over 40 years later, Williams still insists that he is completely innocent. Wait, just run the DNA. Run the DNA. Why are we running the DNA? Why are they running the DNA? Reopening the case. To run the DNA, maybe? Wayne Williams appealed his conviction in 1982, but the appellate court rejected it. So in 1983, Williams elevated his appeal to the Georgia Supreme Court. While he waited, Williams was visited in prison every single week by his parents, Homer and Faye, who for some reason had not visited him in the 6 months before his trial. Take that as significant if you wish. Williams did not see his ex-girlfriend, Gwen, but he did receive letters from a few female hybristophiles claiming to be in love with him. Hybristophiles are people who fall in love with prisoners because their head's not right. Williams is known to have politely responded in writing to a few of these letters, but there's no indication that he ever escalated communications to a visit from one of these women. Williams also received ardent letters and visits from activists who believed he was innocent. Most of them thought Williams was a victim of a racist conspiracy to cover up a series of KKK murders or white lead trafficking ring to avoid a race riot from occurring in the city. Naturally, some of these theorists claimed that it extended through the ranks of the FBI and all the way to the White House. Nothing like a good conspiracy theory. Williams' appeal went before the Georgia Supreme Court in December 1983. His lawyers argued that the pattern evidence from his trial should not have been permitted. The Supreme Court rejected this argument. There were two dissenting judges, Richard Bell and George Smith. Bell said that the use of pattern evidence was unjust and there was not enough proof to place Williams with any of the children at the time they went missing. Bell also pointed out that the MO and the victim profile of the killings often had significant variations. But then, without public explanation, Richard Bell changed his mind, withdrew his dissent, and voted to uphold the rejection of Williams' appeal. That left Justice George Smith, who rejected the pattern evidence as, quote, illustrating the basic unfairness of this trial, and Williams' unenviable position as a defendant who, charged with 2 murders, was forced to defend himself as to 24 other separate killings. Smith also said that the fiber evidence from the white station wagon was hardly definitive, since Cater and Payne could have picked up those fibers in thousands of different locations and in many different contexts. The US Supreme Court refused to hear Williams' case. Thus, with his attempts for freedom failed, Wayne Williams latched onto the theory that the government had framed him to protect the KKK and avoid a riot. Given that the police had investigated George Sanders and his brothers, there was at least some evidence for this. Williams gave an interview outlining his allegations. Quote, Atlanta at the time was in a panic. They wanted any suspect they could find, and let's be honest, it had to be a black person, because if it had been a white suspect, Atlanta would have gone up in flames. It came very close to that. I feel like it had to be a black person because, as we mentioned earlier, like a white person in that neighborhood or the 3 KKK members driving around in a car, you're gonna get noticed. The Georgia Bureau of Investigations responded by saying that the Sanders brothers were suspected drug dealers and gun runners, but there was nothing solid connecting them to the child killings. The police also revealed that in 1981, each of the Sanders brothers had given a lie detector test and each had passed with flying colors on the first try. While lie detectors are notoriously unreliable and inadmissible in court, it is fairly difficult for 3 separate people to beat one on the first go. Nevertheless, the story wouldn't die. In 1985, author and civil rights activist James Baldwin wrote a long essay called The Evidence of Things Not Seen, inspired by the biblical verse Hebrews 11:1. Baldwin evoked the tragedies of African American history, denounced the initial indifference of authorities to the killings, and heaped skepticism on the legality of Williams' trial. Dude, it went all the way to the US Supreme Court. There is no higher voice on legality. Written in the style of an evangelical preacher, the essay was published as a book and had wide circulation. The following year, 1986, Spin magazine printed an article called A Question of Justice that revisited the KKK theory. The article repeated statements made by Charles Sanders about Louis Gita and the telephone conversation between Terry and Don. The article also claimed that Charles Sanders was seen getting out of a white station wagon owned by a white man who had a German shepherd. The fact that the Georgia Bureau of Investigations destroyed the recording of the phone conversation and sealed the file on the KKK caused a significant amount of outrage in the public. A campaign was launched to free Wayne Williams. Attorneys William Kunstler, Bobby Lee Cook, and Alan Dershowitz, who later represented O.J. Simpson, I thought that name sounded familiar, managed to get Williams a hearing in front of a judge. However, the claims made by police informants that Charles Sanders had threatened the life of Louis Gita and later admitted to killing him along with 20 other children were not deemed credible. The first informant had told police about the threat on Gita's life only after his murder became public knowledge, and both informants had a poor track record of giving false information to police in exchange for payment. The request for retrial was therefore denied. In 1998, Wayne Williams filed a habeas corpus petition with the Butts County Superior Court, again requesting retrial. Again, he was denied. Another 7 years passed. By this point, Williams had spent 24 years in prison. Then, on May 6, 2005, the chief of police of DeKalb County, Lewis Graham, announced that he was reopening the investigations into the murder of Aaron Witch, Curtis Walker, and Yusuf Bell, as well as William Barrett and Patrick Balthazar. DeKalb County borders Fulton County, aka Atlanta proper, and it was in DeKalb County where the bodies of 5 victims were dumped. This gave Graham the jurisdiction and authority to reopen the case. He justified the decision by saying that he did not believe that Williams was guilty of all of the murders. Yeah, I mean, me neither necessarily. I think there's some pretty glaring ones where the murderers could still be out there and should be looked into. Do I think Wayne Williams killed lots of people? Hell yes! He's in prison forever. But that doesn't mean that 2 other people should be walking free because the police can't just want to wrap stuff up. Come on now. Graham also several times publicly invoked the KKK theory. In the press, Graham was accused of reopening the investigations to distract attention from his own poor performance as a police chief. The crime rate had shot up under his tenure, and there had been a flood of allegations of police misconduct. The investigation carried on for a year, and police found nothing new to indicate that the KKK was involved and nothing that pointed toward a new suspect. The investigation was therefore closed. Meanwhile, Chief Graham had staked his professional reputation on the case, and so he resigned. His replacement, Nick Marinelli, said, quote, "We dredged up what we had and nothing panned out. So until it does, or additional evidence comes our way, or there's forensic feedback from our existing evidence, we will continue to pursue cold cases that are within our reach." In 2006, Williams filed another habeas corpus petition. His lawyers had procured a signed affidavit from witness Robert Henry saying that his claim of seeing Williams holding hands with Nathaniel Cater was a lie. Williams also changed his alibi from being at home with his parents to being in a recording studio the night Cater disappeared. The petition was rejected. The presiding judge, Beverly Martin, wrote that the affidavit and Williams' new alibi would not, quote, "have more than a minimal impact upon the outcome of Mr. Williams' trial if it had been presented to the jury in 1981. Robert Henry later told the media that had been induced to change his story by one of Wayne Williams' associates. He was given a pre-written statement that he was told to sign. Robert Henry refused to say any more on the issue. Theories ranged between Henry being bribed or threatened with violence to change his story. If Wayne Williams was somehow involved, it does not reflect well on his claims of innocence. No, it doesn't. Good news is he's in prison forever. In 2007, Fulton County authorities ran a DNA test. Finally, let's go! And they found on a few of the victims' bodies. The sample only permitted a mitochondrial DNA test, which is much less definitive. However, the tested hair matched that of the samples taken from Williams' German Shepherd in 1981, excluding 99% of other dogs. A mitochondrial match of 1 in 100 is less precise than 1 in several billion, but it kept Williams on the list of likely suspects. Yeah, and I'd say 1% ain't reasonable doubt. That's just doubt. That's not reasonable. That same year, Fulton County tested the mitochondrial DNA of the 2 hairs found on the body of Patrick Baltazar. Again, the hair matched Williams' genetics, excluding 99.5% of people and 98% of all African Americans. Once again, the test did not exonerate Williams, but reaffirmed him as a likely suspect. Yes, there was insufficient samples of blood residue from the station wagon and Williams' home to perform DNA tests with the technology available at that time. Well, come on, it's not 2007 anymore, it's 2024, we got new technology. Over a decade later, here we go. In 2018, documentarian Will Packer began developing a high-profile miniseries on the Atlanta child murders for Discovery Channel and Apple TV. It roughly coincided with the 40th anniversary of the start of the killings. The miniseries highlighted the fact that Wayne Williams was never prosecuted for any of the deaths of the children, but was locked up for murdering 2 adults. It stressed that many families did not feel that they got closure. The documentary also revived the theory that the KKK, or a PDF sex ring, was responsible for the murders, and that Wayne Williams was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. The news of the documentary got such a considerable amount of press attention in the run-up to its 2019 release that it revived discussion in Atlanta and the wider United States of Williams' innocence and possibility of a government cover-up. In response, a few days before the release of the documentary in March 2019, Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms announced that they were reopening the Atlanta child murders case. Bottom told the press, quote, "There may not be any evidence available that can be re-examined, but we are taking the necessary steps to formally say that we are going to open up every box and look in every corner and see what we have left." I don't think it's any secret that, for many people, there have been questions as to whether or not Wayne Williams was responsible for all the murders. Yeah, this is good, finally. It's just many decades later. Later in 2019, an Atlanta man named Derwin Davis came forward claiming that Wayne Williams had tried to abduct him in 1979, and a man named Isaac Rogers claimed that Williams had tried to abduct him in 1981. 2 years passed, no news released to the public about the investigation. Then, in 2021, Keisha Lance Bottoms announced that all the samples containing DNA, hair and residue had been sent to a private lab in Utah for analysis. Excellent, so we're using that newfangled DNA technology, like the one that can just do better. Right, they didn't have the technology at the time to get it from the carpets, but the good news, just keep it in there. It'll get there eventually. In the past 3 years, the Utah lab has refused to discuss the results of the testing with either journalists or the victims' families, despite numerous pleas from the latter. Keisha Lance Bottoms finished her term as mayor in 2022 and became senior advisor to the Biden administration. Much of the political impetus to conclude the investigation departed with her. Just release the results! What? Like with unannounced results from the testing of the Zodiac DNA samples, it is presumed by many commentators that the reason why no formal announcement has been made regarding the Atlanta samples is because they have not produced significant, conclusive, or differing results. Just tell us! Officially, however, the investigation into the Atlanta child murders remains open. In June 2023, the city of Atlanta unveiled a memorial to the victims of the murders outside City Hall. It is a 55-foot-long curved edifice onto which the names of all 30 victims have been inscribed. Each name is adorned with a white flower. At the end of the monument is a flame that burns perpetually, symbolizing the victims' everlasting memory in the minds of Atlanta's people and the continued search to discover what happened to them. At the time of writing, Wayne Williams is 66 years old, having spent 43 years in prison. He's next eligible for parole in November 2027, which with a bit of luck he won't be granted. Dismembered appendices. Number 1. The Atlanta child murders burned its way so thoroughly into the American psyche that for almost 2 decades, the series of killings was the primary thing that the city of Atlanta was known for in the rest of the United States, or referred to when Atlanta came up in popular culture. The association only faded with the 1996 Atlanta Summer Games. Unfortunately, the games themselves were marred by the Centennial Park bombing that killed 1 spectator and wounded 111 others. I feel like I'm just out of touch with Atlantan history, apparently, because I never heard of these murders. And I never knew that there was I mean, I vaguely maybe mentioned it in a video once, but the Centennial Park bombing is not something I'm particularly familiar with or knew about. Number 2. In 1985, CBS aired a 5-hour miniseries called The Atlanta Child Murders, starring James Earl Jones, Morgan Freeman, Martin Sheen, and Bill Paxton. That's a hell of a cast. It depicts Wayne Williams, played by Calvin Levels, as the villain. Conversely, in 2000, the Showtime network aired a movie called Who Killed Atlanta's Children, starring James Belushi, which depicts Williams, played by Clee Bennett, as innocence of the KKK and government cover-up theory as the probable truth. Number 3. In 2019, the second season of Mindhunter dramatized the events of the Atlanta child murders. Again, Wayne Williams, I don't think I've seen that. I really enjoyed the first season of Mindhunter. Did I just forget to watch the second season? Again, Wayne Williams is depicted as the likely villain, though there is some ambiguity raised at the end about whether Williams killed all the victims. Emphasis is also placed on how the victims' families were deprived of closure. Number 4. As of 2023, approximately 350 missing children's cases are active and open in Atlanta. Jesus. All right, everybody. That's where we end today's episode. Thank you very much for being here. Appreciate it. And I'll see you in the next one.